I'm Megan Lieberman, live from the New York Times newsroom. Another debate begins in just 30 minutes, and it's a new race after President Obama's widely panned performance last week. Tonight, the running mates face off. White House correspondent Jackie Combs and Metro editor Carolyn Ryan are here with a preview. So, popular lore is that debates don't really matter that much in terms of really moving the needle, but last week seemed to, and so it does put a lot of attention on this week's debate. What does each of them have to do tonight? What is Joe Biden's role tonight?
Well, Joe Biden is mainly the cleanup crew. The guy that's known for gaffes is now coming in to clean. It's better than the alternative. And he really does. I mean, he really does need to.
I mean, not that he wants the president to mess up, but
yeah.
He's got to like being the savior.
He really needs to win this tonight, and he's handicapped by the fact that he comes into this with net unfavorable ratings in the polls, which is sort of interesting considering that he's such a such a personable, affable guy. Yeah. But the main thing he needs to do is to present a strong case for the administration's record on both the economy and national security. The case that the president did not make last week. And as for Paul Ryan, I think what he's actually got a harder job than he would have before last week's debate, I think, because he needs not to contradict the new moderate Mitt Romney, right, even though he was picked to be on the ticket because he's the so-called conservative intellectual.
Carolyn, I'm really interested in this idea of how Paul Ryan toes the line between being true to his sort of ideological conservative orthodoxy and sort of sticking with the line that Mitt Romney laid out last week. And it does seem like something of a dance for him, doesn't it?
It is a dance. I mean, there are two parts to it, right? One is ideological and position-based. He can't allow himself to get tangled up in sort of his previous positions versus what Mitt Romney is projecting now.
Right.
But one, frankly, is much more stylistic. And I do think that this is a night where Paul Ryan has to change his style somewhat. I think he needs to speak more slowly. I think he needs to use language that is warmer and less empirical. I think he has to sort of project caring, humanness. If they're talking about Medicare, you can expect he would talk about his mother and not, the cost curve in the chief actuary. And this is a challenge to him because he's a very emphatic and aggressive debater. Right. However, if you watch the clips, when he feels a little cornered, the way he buttresses his position is with numbers. And he's got to go to a different place, and he's got to have sort of a wider aperture for how he explains his positions.
You guys both mentioned to me before we came on that Ryan can be a little bit sharp or a little arrogant in some of these contexts, right, and it could come off maybe a little off-putting.
Yeah, I think this is something that is a particular danger with women. There have been focus groups that have shown that it's a factor of both a sort of perceived arrogance and his young age that sort of comes off, especially to older women, as a little off-putting.
A little.
Well, there's a well-known clip that you see where he stood side by side with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and he started talking about how he wished he could have an adult conversation with her, and his facial expressions are so revealing. He's kind of rolling his eyes and saying, what's with her? And it's almost reflexive with him. It can come across inadvertently, I think, as sort of smug. And I do think generationally he has to be careful because the audience, will include a significant number of older voters who haven't really focused on him in the past.
Let's talk about Biden's demeanor a little bit. Biden has to be passionate. He has to be more aggressive, obviously, than the president was last week. That's what people are looking for. But he also has to be careful not to be too overheated, which is also a place he can go.
Right. When he gets overheated, you have the problem. He's more likely to say something that he doesn't mean to say, like the recent statement where he said the middle class had been buried for the last 4 years, and he was very fired up at that point, and you can tell when you watch it that he didn't mean it the way it comes out, but he said it, so it's fair game.
Let's talk a little about the age difference too, which we were talking about a minute ago. That in the past several years has played in these vice presidential debates to the advantage of the elder candidate.
Right.
I think that was true with Lloyd Benson, with Dick Cheney. I'm sure Paul Ryan would say he's no Dan Quayle, but there is a question here of how Biden plays up his experience and how Ryan handles the fact that he doesn't have as much experience.
Right. It's a really good point. One of the reasons that Ryan was relying on Ted Olson is that he's sort of a generational contemporary for Biden.
Right.
But I do think one area where you might see this, the kind of gravitas question and experience and comfort, is in foreign policy. And I would think that Biden would try to exploit that and maybe show off a little bit. Absolutely. But I do think for Americans watching, seeing that generational comparison for the first time in such a direct way, Ryan has to be careful not to seem kind of flippant or kind of dismissive of Biden.
Yeah, this is the first time in over a half century where there's a ticket, that is the Romney-Ryan ticket, where neither candidate has any military service whatsoever or service in a foreign policy arena. So there's a real a gap for both of them in that. And so I think Paul Ryan needs to show some area where he's really conversant and aggressive. And I think that could be, the situation in the controversy regarding Libya.
Thanks, guys. National political correspondent Jim Rutenberg is one of the reporters tasked with writing the lead story for tomorrow's paper. He's standing by with assistant managing editor Rick Burke. Rick?
Jim, when I was in your shoes, reporting on the lead story on the debates, I was very nervous because there's a lot to do on deadline and synthesizing all these exchanges back and forth. What's important, what's not, what facts are right. How are you coping in the pregame before the
I'm not
debate?
coping that well, no.
And what do you do to prepare and relax?
You know what? I try to kind of put all the chatter out of my mind, turn off the pundits on TV, and just kind of make sure I'm up on all the positions, everything that's been leading up to this moment, but without the TV, without all the other voices.
But you're starting to write the story even before the debate ends. How trying is that?
That's hard because when you do that, you're kind of in your mind, even if you're trying not to write what you think's going to happen, it's kind of bleeding through what you think's going to happen. So if something totally unexpected happens, you have to kind of run back through the story and update it and make sure it all tracks.
Right. Well, what are you going to be looking for in this debate specifically?
On the substance, which is most important, obviously, it'll be how does Paul Ryan own or not quite own his budgetary plans that have been so controversial on Medicare, on this what the Democrats call a voucher program to privatize or some of it. And then there's stylistically, these debates matter a lot, and as we saw last week. So we're going to really look at the body language. How does Biden come off? Can Biden sort of deliver the punches that his boss, President Obama, could not last week?
Well, when you mentioned Ryan first and how he is on substance, how do you balance that with Biden? Do you feel like you have to give each of them equal billing?
It depends on how the debate goes. I would assume that Biden is coming in to try to make sure that Ryan has ownership of his old budgetary plan that Romney's sort of tried to keep a distance from. So if Biden ends up pushing it that way, that will just take over the story because that's what happened.
Now, you talked about trying to get all the clutter out of your head. How much are you inundated, you and your reporting partner, Jeff Zeleny, how much are you inundated by facts and figures and pre-spin from the campaigns?
We're inundated by it, but in a way that it's almost there's so much of it's almost easier to turn off than it might have been years ago because a lot of it's on Twitter and a lot of it's on cable. So they used to come around debate. Obviously, I'm doing this from the office, but Jeff's in the debate hall. They used to come through and just put press releases on your desk, as you probably remember. That's kind of ended, so you can actually turn it off.
Well, that's another thing. We had a discussion last week. I said, Jim, why are you in the debate hall and not in the office writing?
Right.
And there's arguments both ways. Which do you think is a better place to cover the debate?
I think it depends. We split the difference this time where one of us is in there, one of us isn't. I like watching it on television to see what America sees. The networks do a split screen. When you're there at the site, you don't see the split screen. You're watching one guy at a time. But sometimes you want to be there, too, to kind of see what the aides are saying right away and what the aides are saying beforehand. You get, like, what the campaign's thinking. But I think nothing shows what the country sees when you watch it on television, period.
A little more about what you're going to be looking for from Biden in terms of substance and where he could slip up.
I wonder if, obviously he's known to have his gaffes.
He is, but he didn't 4 years ago.
He doesn't have gaffes in debates,
right.
And that's what the mantra you see on television these days. But, if he has a gaffe, it's a big problem for the Obama campaign. But also, is he a folksy Joe? Is he aggressive Joe? 4 years ago, he played with his part in the debate with Palin kind of very artfully. It was a delicate role. This time it might be less delicate because they're in a more of a rough and tumble sort of environment, but we'll see.
And speaking of the Palin debate, remember she famously called Biden Joe?
Yes.
Do you think they'll be on a first-name basis tonight?
Well, there's already one interesting thing has come out tonight, and that is that the Romney campaign has asked that Ryan be referred to as Mr., not budget chairman, not congressman, but Mr., which I think is very interesting.
That is it. Are they going to do it? Do you know?
It's the host, Martha Raddatz, who's moderating the debate, will do that. It's part of the agreement. So you'd think he's either, on one hand, kind of maybe not wanting to own the House kind of title.
That's interesting.
And there's also a stature issue, congressman versus vice president, former senator.
That's really interesting. Okay, Jim, thank you very much. We'll see what happens.
Thanks
soon
a lot.
Enough. Back to you, Megan.
Performance as moderator in last week's debate. All eyes will turn to ABC's Martha Raddatz tonight. Earlier, I spoke with Presidential Debate Commission co-chair Frank Fahrenkopf about the role of the moderator and how the debates are structured. I started by asking him about tonight's format.
What we're going to do is divide the 90 minutes into 9 10-minute pods. Martha Raddatz from ABC will be moderating this debate, and so she will present a subject in each of the pods. Each of the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond, and she will then follow up for the next 6 minutes, trying to drill down a little deeper with regard to the answers that were presented. And then, as there was in Denver, each of the candidates at the end will get the 2-minute closing.
So, Frank, there was obviously a lot of criticism of Jim Lehrer's performance in Wednesday's debate. Did that play out exactly the way you wanted and expected it to?
Absolutely. I mean, the criticism of Jim Lehrer was just totally uncalled for. Jim accomplished what we've been trying to accomplish for over 20 years with the Debate Commission, and that is get the candidates to debate each other rather than it being just some sort of a glorified press conference with very tight seconds and minute control. His job was to, if he got the candidates discussing an issue, to get out of the way and let them continue. He did a masterful job. I mean, most people who watched that debate and knew the history over the last 20 years said it was the most substantive debate that we had. So I think Jim Lehrer did a great job, and the people who were criticizing him the most didn't understand, I think, what our goal was.
Some of the people who criticized him were actually people who've moderated debates before, and one of the things they pushed back on was the fact that there weren't a lot of follow-up questions. And isn't that, as you just said before, part of the role of the moderator, to push the candidates and to challenge them when they make statements that aren't accurate?
But no. In a debate, you have the two candidates who are supposed to be going at each other and raising questions. If one candidate says something that's inaccurate, the other person has an opportunity and an opening to challenge them on that. So that's how we look at it. The story is the candidates. It should not be the moderator. And that's why we think Jim did exactly what the commission wanted to achieve by changing the format in this cycle.
So you think basically it's totally incumbent on the candidates to fact check each other and that there's no role for the moderator or the commission in doing that?
No. The moderator is the one who asks the questions. He or she is the one who picks the subject matter that's going to be covered. It's within their discretion, clearly, if they want to come in and intrude. But again, if the candidates are involved face to face, we think it's best to let the candidates go forward. They know these are two very, very experienced men presidentially, two very experienced men vice presidentially. They've been out on the campaign trail. They know what the issues are. They know what the other candidates' position are. It's not for the moderator to choose what he or she believes ought to be discussed. It's not for the media to dictate it. These candidates should be able to do it themselves. That's what the educational value, we think, of the debate is all about.
Why release the topics in advance? What's the point of doing that?
Well, I think our decision was that we wanted people to know, the candidates to know what they were going to be discussing, so that there wouldn't be any surprises, like a question, name the president of some country in Asia and spell his last name, any trick questions. Substance. What are the issues that the American people are deeply concerned about and that they should know, be educated about when they're going to go to the polls? And so, again, we don't interfere with the discretion of the moderators. Their journalistic integrity is theirs. It's not ours. And that's why I think we've got a team here of 4 very, very experienced moderators who will present what the issues are that ought to be discussed.
Now, critics have said that the process of negotiating with the candidates about the ground rules for these debates should be more open. Why is it such a secret process? Wouldn't it benefit the public to know how things are decided?
I'll tell you how they're decided right now. There are no secret negotiations. That's a bunch of garbage that opponents of the commission have put out there for years. We picked the dates for these debates. We picked the location of these debates. We announced what the format was going to be and who the moderators were going to be. We had no discussions whatsoever or consultations with the candidates. Now, 8-10 years ago, there used to be debates over the debates. That doesn't exist anymore, and it did in this cycle.
As we saw from last week, debates can have a real impact on voter polling. And the stakes are high for both campaigns tonight. Nate Silver of the 538 blog is here now with more. So Nate, you think that Mitt Romney has settled at about a 3 to 4 point bounce out of his debate performance last week. That's high historically, right?
It's high, so it would be in line with the highest debate bounces ever. Bill Clinton in 1992 got a very big bounce after the second debate. John Kerry got about a 3 point bounce after the first debate in 2004. So Romney, and remember the post-debate polls showed a more lopsided verdict than almost any other debate. So this kind of flows through from that into the head-to-head polls.
Right. You think that there maybe was even a higher bounce that sort of ebbed, like maybe even a very short-term 5 to 6
It seems like we didn't get very much data in just a day or two after the debate. It seemed like it might have been even a little bit higher. Although Democrats were saying earlier in the week, oh, this is already fading, and then the last couple of days, the tracking polls have, if anything, moved toward Romney a little bit. So I think you might need the news cycle to turn over if this is a temporary thing, or else it might be kind of priced in the rest of the way.
Right. So how has Mitt Romney moved in your forecast since last week?
So he's gone from having about a 15% chance of winning, which is when he was behind Obama by 5 points with a month to go, to about a 33% chance. So 1 in 3, more than double. And remember, if he hadn't won that debate, Obama would have kept moving up because Romney's running out of time and opportunities. So it's really a huge event.
And we're seeing this jump reflected both in national polls and state polls?
Yeah. So in state polls, you still see, though, a lot of Obama leads, not in every state poll, but in more of them than not. And part of the reason why is because the way we looked at the data the whole year, Obama's state polling, especially in the swing states, was always a little bit better than his national polling would suggest. So it's maybe all moved by about the same amount. But if Obama had a 5 or a 6 point lead in Ohio before, you lose 3 or 4 points, well, you still have a 1, 2, 3 point edge. And so Romney still has problems finding a map that contains 270 electoral votes.
Now, generally people talk about challengers gaining from the first debate. Mm-hmm. How often, you talked about Bill Clinton, but how often do they gain from the second debate, the third debate?
So there's been no tendency over time for the challenger to outperform the incumbent in subsequent debates. It's the first debate when you go on stage and you're the equal. And also, by the way, the incumbent is really rusty. If you go back and watch Ronald Reagan's performance against Walter Mondale in 1984, and Reagan, I think, frankly, a much better debater than Obama at his best, was horrible in that first debate.
I think very few people realize that Mondale got a bounce out of that first debate.
Yeah, well, okay, so if you go from being 20 points back to 17
points back, how big
right,
is that, right?
It's entertaining, but not much more than that, whereas we're right at the margin where Obama, a 4 point bounce deprived him of the whole advantage he had, basically, in advance of the debate.
How about vice presidential debates? Is there ever a bounce out of those?
I mean, this is one where the evidence is pretty unambiguous, that historically there hasn't been. People remember the 88 debate between Benson and Dukakis, where Jack Kennedy, et cetera, right? And that didn't move the numbers at all. In fact, the Bush-Quell ticket, I think, gained half a point in the polling average. So you would have to have some major gaffe or some major moment. The one caveat is that debates throughout this whole election cycle, going back to the primaries, have been a lot more impactful than the conventional wisdom would hold. I almost think that in the age of Twitter and social media, where everything gets magnified and blown up, that you can have this kind of groupthink that makes the small wins seem like a huge one. So that's my hedge there.
Thanks a lot, Nate.
Thank you, Megan.
A big part of our coverage here tonight is comparing the candidates' statements with the record. Assistant Managing Editor Rick Burke is standing by with Michael Cooper, who's leading the fact-checking efforts. Rick?
Michael, when we were here last week, you were saying how you had collected dozens and dozens of fact checks ready to go in case Romney or Obama said something that needed checking. But a lot of what you had wasn't used. Can you talk about that?
Sure. There was a bunch of stuff that was left on the cutting room floor because, like many other people, we thought that Romney's comments about the 47% might come up in the course of the debate. So we had done some analysis of who are these people who don't pay taxes, what percentage are poor, what percentage are elderly, things like that. It never came up. We thought immigration might come up, so we were looking at, what did President Obama do or not do to push immigration reform. It was never mentioned. So who knows? Maybe with these things I'll get to see the light of day tonight.
Was there anything you weren't prepared for that came up last week?
There were some claims that we didn't expect because we hadn't heard before that came up. I mean, Mitt Romney falsely said that President Obama had doubled the deficit when in fact the deficit has been sort of coming down under him. So that was one we sort of did in real time as it was happening. Mm-hmm. And I expect there will be things that we're not prepared for tonight, although we have a whole team of reporters with expertise in foreign policy, the economy, education, immigration, all ready to go tonight.
Roughly how many questions do you have ready to go?
I couldn't even say. I would say, several dozens. And these are things you have to understand. They're not exactly pre-written because we don't know what they'll say, but we've done research into areas that we think will get raised tonight. It's sort of like we read the Congressional Budget Office, so you don't have to, although thanks to the web, we can link to it so you could read it if you want to, and then we're ready to go when these sort of contentious issues come up.
Is there anything obscure that you have ready to go or that you've researched for tonight that about Ryan or about Biden?
Well, I think with both of these figures, you have to be careful and you don't know what will come up. I mean, Paul Ryan's speech at the convention was sort of noticed for a lot of things he said that were sort of inconsistent with his past record or incorrect. And with Vice President Biden, you sort of never know what he'll say. He's known for gaffes. I mean, 25 years ago, his presidential campaign almost ended because of using the Neil Kinnock line at a debate in Iowa. Right. So with both of them, you don't know. So with Congressman Ryan, we looked at his marathon time claims, which sort of came up earlier. With Vice President Biden, we looked at some of the gaffes he's made along the trail, saying that the middle class had been buried, telling an audience that Romney would put you all back in chains, just to try to explain, if it comes up, what was the context, what did they say, and how was it received?
Right. Now, as you said, the Ryan speech at the convention was very well received at the convention, but a lot of fact-checking people like yourself pointed out an array of facts that were in question. With Biden and his convention speech, it wasn't so. And you talk more about Biden's gaffes, but over the years, were there many factual misrepresentations that you found from the vice president or from then Senator Biden?
What we found, and there were some that we wrote about at the convention as well, is that sometimes the way he talks about the Romney or Ryan plans have been a bit exaggerated to make them sound, more draconian or worse than they are. And so it's been in those kind of areas that we found the biggest things, really.
Is there anything that you're going to do differently tonight that you learned from last week that you wish you had done in covering all this?
No, I think we'll just do more, faster, better, I hope. And because, last time we found that, it ends before you realize it, and then you have to worry about the print edition, with just minutes to go. So. And
finally, at the debate between it was Cheney and then Joe Lieberman. What year was that?
That was in 2000. I was in Danville College.
Now you're here in the newsroom at the Times. Which is the better place to watch the debate?
Well, I mean, I always think it's better to watch things on television, although the dirty secret of debates is even when you go there, you tend to be in a hall next to the debate hall watching it on television. Right. So as a practical matter, there's not much difference, although I do remember that I went with not yet Vice President Cheney after the debate, and he had a post-debate party with the bluegrass singer Ricky Skaggs. So I don't think we'll have that at the newsroom.
That was the reward
yes.
for your going. Okay, thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Megan.
Tonight's debate is to the election. It's competing with a few other events on social media. Assistant Managing Editor Jim Roberts is here now with Social Media Editor Lexi Mainland to look at how the vice presidential debate is playing out in public conversation.
Lexi, This isn't the only game in town tonight, right?
No, it's not NYT Gym. And not that everything focuses around New York in life, but there are two big games in town. There's a Yankees game.
Right.
Everyone's looking to see what happens with A-Rod. In fact, someone tweeted us about it.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second.
And Barbra Streisand is performing at the new Barclays Center in Brooklyn, which I know, for example, my mom is going to be flipping back and forth between the debate and Barbara.
And she'll be tweeting?
Probably not tweeting, but
Okay.
even flipping back. Two screens is a big thing for mom.
Now, earlier in the day, we reached out to our followers on Twitter and asked a very simple question, right? What would you, if you were the moderator of tonight's debate, what would you be pushing the candidates on? Now, back to baseball, we did have one guy who said, should A-Rod be benched?
It's a complicated question.
Right,
that
leave him
I
at third in the order, move him down.
barely understood.
I'm sure people watching the game will know the answer, but some of the other questions were really interesting, right?
Yeah, and they were, as we noticed, they were pretty wonky.
Yeah,
and, you know, it's always a question whether people are really paying attention to the debate and how involved they are, but look at some of these questions. What would you as VP do to diffuse the polarization occurring within Congress and our nation as a whole, which was from at Mr. Killian, 1960, sort of a bipartisan question. And if you became president through untimely loss of elected president, how faithful would you be to your running mate's policies? That was from Marion S. Howard. Which I thought was a pretty interesting question.
Yeah, I saw several along those lines,
yeah, which
right?
is sort of, you know, are you ready to take over, but also, like, what would the continuity of your policies be? Which I think goes a little bit to how similar are Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney, and I think people are still feeling that out as they get to know him. How much of a unified ticket are they, or do they have different agendas?
It's also interesting, back in the day, you would remember the tickets would be balanced a little bit more by their differences opposed to their similarities, but here people seem to be looking for those similarities.
Continuity.
Right, right. We had another one, Antimatter 7, was asking, ask them to name 3 specific tax loopholes they would close to help lower the deficit. Now that's interesting. We had a lot of conversation about economics.
Right.
Probably that was the biggest
I would say that was
think?
the overall theme, but again, they were very wonky, and there were questions about Kurdistan that came on our tweets, and there were questions about Israel, and people, you know, are very engaged, more engaged than maybe I thought going into it.
There was one guy who was asking about a statement that Biden made in 2001 about missile defense systems. So these people they're paying attention.
They know their stuff.
Okay, then there was David Daggett, who said, do debates really matter when choosing a candidate?
Right. Well, I want to ask you this question because you're the one who's been covering elections for many years. More than me.
A while.
Yeah, longer than me.
Okay.
So what do they matter?
Oh, I think they do. I think what we saw last week, surely something happened. I mean, I think we all felt it. We felt it that night. I think we saw it through the polls. You know, when we were here last week, we were also looking at debates going back years and years, and people still remember those moments. I really do feel that, you know, they can create memories. Whether they will change the course of history, that might be another matter.
Especially in the age of social media, where things get replayed and replayed and reshared and reshared, I think these things stick in people's memory.
Right, right. The last thing I wanted to mention was we had sports guys, or this probably isn't being shown, but it's worth reading, from both Mr. Ryan and Mr. Biden. If you could be any mythical creature, which would it be, and why?
I would love Martha Raddatz to put that question to them.
Right.
Maybe if you're watching, maybe you could ask them that if you have time. But maybe we should make our predictions. What would they say, or who do we think they?
Sure. Well, I think the one thing we should talk about very quickly were the pictures that came out in Time magazine, Time.com today, of Paul Ryan pumping iron. So that he would be what, Conan or
the Hulk, Incredible Hulk.
Okay.
Something powerful, strong, and muscular.
Okay.
And you know, there's a lot of sort of masculinity bound up with both Biden and Ryan, and so I'd say maybe Biden would be like Popeye, not very mythical, but strong and spinach.
Very manly tonight.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go back. Thanks for this, and back to you, Megan.
Thanks, Jim. We're only a few minutes away from the debate, and White House correspondent Jackie Combs and Metro editor Carolyn Ryan are back with some final thoughts. One thing I was curious about is how directly do we think Joe Biden will go after Paul Ryan? Paul Ryan specifically. Paul Ryan's budget plan, Paul Ryan's Medicare plan, as opposed to the Romney ticket.
I think directly to a fault. And Joe Biden knows this subject, too. He, for the president, headed the budget talks in middle of June of 2011 that stalemated. And he will point out, I think, in the course of this, that Paul Ryan has never been a part of the budget talks, that the attempts to get a resolution of this impasse.
I think There's no question that he may try to bait him a little bit. And we were talking earlier about the potential acrobatics that Paul Ryan may have to perform, given that he is so identified with certain proposals and programs. And now Romney seems to be, if not abandoning them, at least shifting.
Softening them, anyway.
Yes. And I do think on the flip side, what I would predict is that Paul Ryan, the strongest impression and most troubling impression that was left, I think, by Mitt Romney was one of weakness in Obama. And I think if you looked at some of the poll numbers, you saw that voters for the first time were calling Romney the stronger leader. So I think Ryan has to try to reinforce this notion of weakness and this notion of, you've been there for 4 years, why haven't you fixed it? And I think that's the thematic attack he's got to make.
Now, there's been this interesting expectations game turnabout this time. Everyone expected President Obama to win last time. The polling shows that people expect Paul Ryan to win this time, which is sort of interesting given that people have really never seen him debate outside his district. And Joe Biden's sort of a good and experienced debater. I've got to imagine that Paul Ryan has some modicum of nerves going into tonight, given that he's probably only really been seen by a vast national audience one time, his convention speech.
Yeah, and I was
someone.
rather struck during that convention speech. I mean, it was well received, certainly in the hall. But I was struck, if you go back and watch it, the first 10 minutes, his facial expressions, he was kind of licking his lips, and he seemed uncomfortable. And I think he got better as the speech went on. But let's not, underestimate what it means for him for 90 minutes to be in a setting like this. He's not accustomed to that.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden has been here before.
Right.
Many times.
And former senators are very used to talking for 90 minutes on end.
And he's had primary debates, and he's had...
And for all of the popular image of Joe Biden as gaffe prone, when you look back at the 24 or so debates during the Democratic primary race in 2008, in 2007, he won a lot of those.
Yeah, he did a great job in many of them.
But he was at 2% in the polls, so it didn't really matter.
But he did the next morning have people saying, why is Joe Biden not doing better? He won that debate. Another thing that we talked about that was curious, that sort of came up before, was this whole favorable, unfavorable question. Now, Paul Ryan is not a very well-known figure, and he's actually been sort of, demonized by a lot on the left since 2010. And yet he's sort of even in his favorable, unfavorables. Joe Biden is deep underwater, and it's sort of curious. He seems like, as we said, a kind of likable guy.
It's curious to me too, and I've asked other people, and they agree that it's sort of surprising, because anybody in Washington who knows Joe Biden, I mean, what's not to like is sort of the response. And I wrote down some of the words that when Pew polled about this and told people, just give us one word. The words people threw out were things like goofy, dumb, jerk, moron, buffoon, and but then Paul Ryan is far less known, and so the words were sort of neutral, like conservative, unknown, young. But it is funny about Joe Biden, because it's not like he's acerbic or in any way mean. It's not like a
polarizing figure.
Antithesis of Dick Cheney, perhaps. But I think it's that people see the goofball and they don't see the serious side of him. So he may have been ill-served by this administration.
It looks like the candidates are about to take the stage, so we're going to go live to the debate.
Tonight's debate is divided between domestic and foreign policy issues. And I'm going to move back and forth between foreign and domestic, since that is what a vice president or president would have to do. We will have 9 different segments. At the beginning of each segment, I will ask both candidates a question, and they will each have 2 minutes to answer. Then I will encourage a discussion between the candidates with follow-up questions. By coin toss, it has been determined that Vice President Biden will be first to answer the opening question. We have a wonderful audience here at Centre College tonight. You will no doubt hear their enthusiasm at the end of the debate. And right now, as we welcome Vice President Joe Biden and Congressman Paul Ryan.
How are you doing?
Okay, you got your little wave to the families in. That's great. Good evening, gentlemen. It really is an honor to be here with both of you. I would like to begin with Libya. On a rather somber note, 1 month ago tonight, on the anniversary of 9/11, Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other brave Americans were killed in a terrorist attack in Benghazi. The State Department has now made clear there were no protesters there. It was a pre-planned assault by heavily armed men. Wasn't this a massive intelligence failure, Vice President Biden?
What it was a tragedy, Martha. Chris Stevens was one of our best. We lost 3 other brave Americans. And I can make absolutely 2 commitments to you and all the American people tonight. One, we will find and bring to justice the men who did this. And secondly, we will get to the bottom of it, and wherever the facts lead us, wherever they lead us, we will make clear to the American public, because whatever mistakes are made will not be made again. When you're looking at a president, Martha, it seems to me that you should take a look at his most important responsibility. That's caring for the national security of the country. And the best way to do that is take a look at how he's handled the issues of the day. On Iraq, the president said he would end the war. Governor Romney said that was a tragic mistake. We should have left 30,000. He ended it. Governor Romney said that was a tragic mistake. We should have left 30,000 troops there. With regard to Afghanistan, he said he will end the war in 2014. Governor Romney said we should not set a date, number one, and number two, with regard to 2014, it depends. When it came to Osama bin Laden, the president, the first day in office, I was sitting with him in the Oval Office. He called in the CIA and signed an order saying my highest priority is to get bin Laden. Prior to the election, prior to him being sworn in, Governor Romney was asked the question about how he would proceed. He said, I wouldn't move heaven and earth to get bin Laden. He didn't understand it was more than about taking a murderer off the battlefield. It was about restoring America's heart and letting terrorists around the world know if you do harm to America, we will track you to the gates of hell if need be. And lastly, the President of the United States has led with a steady hand and clear vision. Governor Romney, the opposite. The last thing we need now is another war.
Congressman Ryan.
We mourn the loss of these 4 Americans who were murdered. When you take a look at what has happened just in the last few weeks, they sent the UN ambassador out to say that this was because of a protest and a YouTube video. It took the president 2 weeks to acknowledge that this was a terrorist attack. He went to the UN, and in his speech at the UN, he said 6 times he talked about the YouTube video. Look, if we are hit by terrorists, we're going to call it for what it is, a terrorist attack. Our ambassador in Paris has a Marine detachment guarding him. Shouldn't we have a Marine detachment guarding our ambassador in Benghazi, a place where we knew that there was an al-Qaeda cell with arms? This is becoming more troubling by the day. They first blamed the YouTube video. Now they're trying to blame the Romney-Ryan ticket for making this an issue. And with respect to Iraq, we had the same position before the withdrawal, which was we agreed with the Obama administration. Let's have a status of forces agreement to make sure that we secure our gains. The vice president was put in charge of those negotiations by President Obama, and they failed to get the agreement. We don't have a status of forces agreement because they failed to get one. That's what we were talking about. And when it comes to our veterans, we owe them a great debt of gratitude for what they've done for us, including your son, Bo. But we also want to make sure that we don't lose the things we fought so hard to get. And with respect to Afghanistan, the 2014 deadline, we agree with the 2014 transition. But what we also want to do is make sure that we're not projecting weakness abroad. And that's what's happening here. This Benghazi issue would be a tragedy in and of itself. But unfortunately, it's indicative of a broader problem. And that is what we are watching on our TV screens is the unraveling of the Obama foreign policy, which is making the world more chaotic and us less safe.
I just want to talk to you about right in the middle of the crisis. Governor Romney, and you're talking about this again tonight, talked about the weakness, talked about apologies from the Obama administration. Was that really appropriate right in the middle of the crisis?
On that same day, the Obama administration had the exact same position. Let's recall that they disavowed their own statement that they had put out earlier in the day in Cairo. So we had the same position, but it's never too early to speak out for our values. We should have spoken out right away when the Green Revolution was up and starting, when the mullahs in Iran were attacking their people. We should not have called Bashar Assad a reformer when he was turning his Russian-provided guns on his own people. We should always stand up for peace, for democracy, for individual rights. And we should not be imposing these devastating defense cuts, because what that does, when we equivocate on our values, when we show that we're cutting our own defense, it makes us more weak. It projects weakness, and when we look weak, our adversaries are much more willing to test us. They're more brazen in their attacks, and our allies are less willing to trust us.
With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey.
And why is that so?
Because not a single thing he said is accurate. First of all,
be specific.
I will be very specific. Number one, this lecture on embassy security. The congressman here cut embassy security in his budget by $300 million below what we asked for. Number one. So much for the embassy security piece. Number two, Governor Romney, before he knew the facts, before he even knew that our ambassador was killed, he was out making a political statement which was panned by the media around the world. And this talk about this weakness, I don't understand what my friend's talking about here. This is a president who's gone out and done everything he has said he was going to do. This is a guy who's repaired our alliances so the rest of the world follows us again. This is the guy who brought the entire world, including Russia and China, to bring about the most devastating efforts on Iran to make sure that they, in fact, stop with their... Look, I mean, these guys bet against America all the time.
Can we talk about... Let me go back to
sure.
Libya. What were you first told about the attack? Why were people talking about protests? When people in the consulate first saw armed men attacking with guns, there were no protesters.
Because
why
that's
did that go on
exactly
for
what
weeks?
we were told by the intelligence community. The intelligence community told us that. As they learned more facts about exactly what happened, they changed their assessment. That's why there's also an investigation headed by Tom Pickering, a leading diplomat from the Reagan years, who is doing an investigation as to whether or not there are any lapses, what the lapses were, so that they will never happen again.
And they wanted more security there.
Well, we weren't told they wanted more security again. We did not know they wanted more security again. And by the way, at the time, we were told exactly, we said exactly what the intelligence community told us that they knew. That was the assessment. And as the intelligence community changed their view, we made it clear they changed their view. That's why I said we will get to the bottom of this. You know, usually when there's a crisis, we pull together. We pull together as a nation. But as I said, even before we knew what happened to the ambassador, the governor was holding a press conference. That's not presidential leadership.
Mr. Ryan, I want to ask you about the Romney campaign talks a lot about no apologies. He has a book called No Apologies. Should the U.S. have apologized for Americans burning Qurans in Afghanistan? Should the U.S. apologize for U.S. Marines urinating on Taliban corpses?
Oh, gosh, yes. Urinating on Taliban corpses? What we should not apologize for.
Burning Qurans immediately.
What we should not be apologizing for are standing up for our values. What we should not be doing is saying to the Egyptian people, while Mubarak is cracking down on them, that he's a good guy, and then the next week say he ought to go. What we should not be doing is rejecting claims for calls for more security in our barracks, in our Marine. We need Marines in Benghazi when the commander on the ground says we need more forces for security. There were requests for extra security. Those requests were not honored. Look, this was the anniversary of 9/11. It was Libya, a country we knew we had al-Qaeda cells there. As we know, al-Qaeda and its affiliates are on the rise in northern Africa. And we did not give our ambassador in Benghazi a Marine detachment. Of course there's an investigation so we can make sure that this never happens again. But when it comes to speaking up for our values, we should not apologize for those. Here's the problem. Look at all the various issues out there, and it's unraveling before our eyes. The vice president talks about sanctions on Iran.
Let's move to Iran. I'd actually like to move to Iran because there's really no bigger national security this country is facing. Both President Obama and Governor Romney have said they will prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, even if that means military action. Last week, former Defense Secretary Bob Gates said a strike on Iran's facilities would not work and, quote, could prove catastrophic, haunting us for generations. Can the two of you be absolutely clear and specific to the American people. How effective would a military strike be, Congressman Ryan?
We cannot allow Iran to gain a nuclear weapons capability. Now, let's take a look at where we've come from. When Barack Obama was elected, they had enough fissile material, nuclear material, to make one bomb. Now they have enough for 5. They're racing toward a nuclear weapon. They're 4 years closer toward a nuclear weapons capability. We've had 4 different sanctions to the UN on Iran, 3 from the Bush administration, 1 here. And the only reason we got it is because Russia watered it down and prevented the sanctions from hitting the central bank. Mitt Romney proposed these sanctions in 2007. In Congress, I've been fighting for these sanctions since 2009. The administration was blocking us every step of the way. Only because we had strong bipartisan support for these tough sanctions were we able to overrule their objections and put them in spite of the administration. Imagine what would have happened if we had these sanctions in place earlier. You think Iran's not brazen? Look at what they're doing. They're stepping up their terrorist attacks. They tried a terrorist attack in the United States last year when they tried to blow up the Saudi ambassador at a restaurant in Washington, D.C. And talk about credibility. When this administration says that all options are on the table, they send out senior administration officials that send all these mixed signals. And so in order to solve this peacefully, which is everybody's goal, you have to have the Ayatollahs change their minds. Look at where they are. They're moving faster toward a nuclear weapon. It's because this administration has no credibility on this issue. It's because this administration watered down sanctions, delayed sanctions, tried to stop us from putting the tough sanctions in place. Now we have them in place because of Congress. They say the military option's on the table, but it's not being viewed as credible. And the key is to do this peacefully, is to make sure that we have credibility. Under a Romney administration, we will have credibility on this issue.
Vice President Biden.
It's incredible. Look, imagine had we let the Republican Congress work out the sanctions. You think there's any possibility the entire world would have joined us? Russia and China, all of our allies. These are the most crippling sanctions in the history of sanctions, period. Period. When Governor Romney's asked about it, he said, we got to keep these sanctions. When you say, well, you're talking about doing more, what you're going to go to war? Is that what you want to do now?
We want to prevent war.
And the interesting thing is how they're going to prevent war. How are they going to prevent war? They say there's nothing more that they say we should do than what we've already done, number one. And number two, with regard to the ability of the United States to take action militarily, it is not in my purview to talk about classified information, but we feel quite confident we could deal a serious blow to the Iranians. But number two, the Iranians are, the Israelis and the United States, our military and intelligence communities are absolutely the same exact place in terms of how close the Iranians are to getting a nuclear weapon. They are a good way away. There is no difference between our view and theirs. When my friend talks about fissile material, they have to take this highly enriched uranium, get it from 20% up, then they have to be able to have something to put it in. There is no weapon that the Iranians have at this point. Both the Israelis and we will know if they start the process of building a weapon. So all this bluster I keep hearing, all this loose talk, what are they talking about? Are you talking about to be more credible? What more can the president do? Stand before the United Nations, tell the whole world, directly communicate to the Ayatollah, we will not let them acquire a nuclear weapon, period, unless he's talking about going to war.
Martha, let's look at this from the view of the Ayatollahs. What do they see? They see this administration trying to water down sanctions in Congress for over 2 years. They're moving faster toward a nuclear weapon. They're spinning the centrifuges faster. They see us saying when we come into the administration, when they're sworn in, we need more space with our ally Israel. They see President Obama in New York City the same day Bibi Netanyahu is, and he's, instead of meeting with him, goes on a daily talk show. They see when we say that these options are on the table, the Secretary of Defense walked them back. They are not changing their mind. That's what we have to do, is change their mind so they stop pursuing nuclear weapons, and they're going faster.
Quickly? Look, you both saw Benjamin Netanyahu hold up that picture of a bomb with a red line and talking about the red line being in spring. So can you solve this if the Romney-Ryan ticket is elected? Can you solve this in 2 months before spring and avoid nuclear?
We can debate the timeline. We can debate the timeline, whether it's that short a time or longer. I agree that it's probably longer. Number two, it's all about credibility.
You don't agree with that bomb and what the Israelis might do.
Look, we both.
Vice President
I don't want to
Biden.
go into classified stuff, but we both agree that to do this peacefully, you got to get them to change their minds. They're not changing their minds. And look at what this administration does.
Let me tell you what the Ayatollah
you have
sees.
to have
the Ayatollah sees his economy being crippled. The Ayatollah sees that there are 50% fewer exports of oil. He sees the currency going into the tank. He sees the economy going into free fall. And he sees the world for the first time totally united in opposition to him getting a nuclear weapon. Now, with regard to Bibi, who's been my friend for 39 years, the president has met with Bibi a dozen times. He's spoken to Bibi Netanyahu as much as he's spoken to anybody. The idea that we're not I was just before he went to the UN, I was in a conference call with the president, with him talking to Bibi for well over an hour in stark relief and detail about what was going on. This is a bunch of stuff. Look, here's the deal.
What does that mean, a bunch of stuff?
Well, it means it's simply inaccurate.
It's Irish.
It's Irish. It is. We Irish call it malarkey.
Thanks for the translation.
No, we Irish call it malarkey. But last thing, the Secretary of Defense has made it absolutely clear. He didn't walk anything back. We will not allow the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon. What Bibi held up there was when they get to the point where they can enrich uranium enough to put into a weapon. They don't have a weapon to put it into. Let's all calm down a little bit here. Iran is more isolated today than when we took office. It was on the ascendancy when we took office. It is totally isolated. I don't know what world these guys are in.
Thank heavens we have these sanctions in place. It's in spite of their opposition.
Oh, God.
They've given 20 waivers to this sanction. And all I have to point to are the results. They're 4 years closer toward a nuclear weapon. I think that case speaks for itself.
Can you tell the American
By the way,
people what's worse, another war in the
closer
Middle East?
to a nuclear weapon. They're closer to being able to get enough fissile material to put in a weapon if they had a weapon.
You're acting a little bit like they don't want one, though.
Oh, I didn't say, no, I'm not saying that. Facts matter, Martha. You're a foreign policy expert. Facts matter. All this loose talk about them, all they have to do is get to enrich uranium in a certain amount and they have a weapon. Not true. Not true. They are more, and if we ever have to take action, unlike when we took office, we will have the world behind us, and that matters. That matters.
What about Bob Gates' statement? Let me read that again. Could prove catastrophic, haunting us for generations.
He is right. It could prove catastrophic if we didn't do it with precision.
And what it does is it undermines our credibility by backing up the point when we make it that all options are on the table. That's the point. The Ayatollahs see these kinds of statements and they think, I'm going to get a nuclear weapon. When we see the kind of equivocation that took place because this administration wanted a precondition policy, so when the Green Revolution started up, they were silent for 9 days. When they see us putting they see us putting daylight between ourselves and our allies in Israel, that gives them encouragement. When they see Russia watering down any further sanctions, the only reason we got a UN sanction is because Russia watered it down and prevented these central bank sanctions in the first place. So when they see this kind of activity, they are encouraged to continue, and that's the problem.
Let me ask you what's worse. War in the Middle East, another war in the Middle East, or a nuclear-armed Iran?
I'll tell you what's worse. A nuclear-armed Iran, which triggers a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. This is the world's largest sponsor of terrorism. They've dedicated themselves to wiping an entire country off the map. They call us the Great Satan. And if they get nuclear weapons, other people in the neighborhood will pursue their nuclear weapons as well.
Vice President
We can't live with that.
War should always be the absolute last resort. That's why these crippling sanctions with Bibi Netanyahu says we should continue, which, if I'm not mistaken, Governor Romney says we should continue. If I may be mistaken, he changed his mind so often, I could be wrong. But the fact of the matter is he says they're working. And the fact is that they are being crippled by them. And we've made it clear, big nations can't bluff. This president doesn't bluff.
Gentlemen, I want to bring the conversation to a different kind of national security issue, the state of our economy. The number one issue here at home is jobs. The percentage of unemployed just fell below 8% for the first time in 43 months. The Obama administration had projected that it would fall below 6% now after the addition of close to $1 trillion in stimulus money. So will both of you level with the American people? Can you get unemployment to under 6%, and how long will it take?
I don't know how long it will take. We can and we will get it under 6%. Let's take a look at the facts. Let's look at where we were when we came to office. The economy was in free fall. We had the Great Recession hit. 9 million people lost their job. $1.6 trillion in wealth lost, in equity in your homes and retirement accounts for the middle class. We knew we had to act for the middle class. We immediately went out and rescued General Motors. We went ahead and made sure that we cut taxes for the middle class. And in addition to that, when that occurred, what did Romney do? Romney said, no, let Detroit go bankrupt. We moved in and helped people refinance their homes. Governor Romney said, no, let foreclosures hit the bottom. But it shouldn't be surprising for a guy who says 47% of the American people are unwilling to take responsibility for their own lives. My friend recently in a speech in Washington said 30% of the American people are takers. These people are my mom and dad, the people I grew up with, my neighbors. They pay more effective tax than Governor Romney pays in his federal income tax. They are elderly people who, in fact, are living off of Social Security. There are veterans and people fighting in Afghanistan right now who are, quote, not paying any taxes. I've had it up to here with this notion that 47%, it's about time they take some responsibility here. And instead of signing pledges to Grover Norquist not to ask the wealthiest among us to contribute to bring back the middle class, they should be signing a pledge saying to the middle class, we're going to level the playing field. We're going to give you a fair shot again. We are going to not repeat the mistakes we made in the past by having a different set of rules for Wall Street and Main Street, making sure that we continue to hemorrhage these tax cuts for the super wealthy. They're pushing the continuation of a tax cut that will give an additional $500 billion in tax cuts to 120,000 families. And they're holding hostage the middle class tax cut because they say we won't continue the middle class tax cut unless you give the tax cut for the super wealthy. It's about time they take some responsibility.
Mr. Ryan.
Joe and I are from similar towns. He's from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I'm from Janesville, Wisconsin. You know what the unemployment rate in Scranton is today?
I sure do.
It's 10%.
Yeah.
You know what it was the day you guys came in? 8.5%. Yeah. That's how it's going all around America. Look.
You don't read the statistics. That's not how it's going. It's going down.
This is his 2-minute answer,
Look.
please.
Did they come in and inherit a tough situation? Absolutely. But we're going in the wrong direction. Look at where we are. The economy is barely limping along. It's growing at 1.3%. That's slower than it grew last year, and last year was slower than the year before. Job growth in September was slower than it was in August, and August was slower than it was in July. We're heading in the wrong direction. 23 million Americans are struggling for work today. 15% of Americans are living in poverty today. This is not what a real recovery looks like. We need real reforms for a real recovery, and that's exactly what Mitt Romney and I are proposing. It's a 5-point plan. Get America energy independent in North America by the end of the decade. Help people who are hurting get the skills they need to get the jobs they want. Get this deficit and debt under control to prevent a debt crisis. Make trade work for America so we can make more things in America and sell them overseas, and champion small businesses. Don't raise taxes on small businesses because they're our job creators. He talks about Detroit. Mitt Romney's a car guy. They keep misquoting him, but let me tell you about the Mitt Romney I know. This is a guy who I was talking to, a family in Northborough, Massachusetts the other day. Cheryl and Mark Nixon. Their kids were hit in a car crash. 4 of them, 2 of them, Rob and Reed, were paralyzed. The Romneys didn't know them. They went to the same church they never met before. Mitt asked if he could come over on Christmas. He brought his boys, his wife, and gifts. Later on, he said, I know you're struggling, Mark. Don't worry about their college. I'll pay for it. When Mark told me this story, because you know what? Mitt Romney doesn't tell these stories. the Nixons told this story. When he told me this story, he said it wasn't the help, the cash help, it's that he gave his time, and he has consistently. This is a man who gave 30% of his income to charity, more than the two of us combined. Mitt Romney's a good man. He cares about 100% of Americans in this country. And with respect to that quote, I think the vice president very well knows that sometimes the words don't come out of your mouth the right way.
Well, I always say what I mean. And so does Romney.
We want everybody to succeed. We want to get people out of poverty, in the middle class, onto a life of self-sufficiency. We believe in opportunity and upward mobility. That's what we're going to push for in a Romney administration.
Vice President, look, I have a feeling you have a few things to say here.
The idea, if you heard that little soliloquy on 47%, and you think he just made a mistake, then I think I think I got a bridge to sell you. Look, I don't doubt his personal generosity, and I understand what it's like. When I was a little younger than the congressman, my wife was in an accident, killed my daughter and my wife, and my two sons survived. I have sat in the homes of many people who have gone through what I get through, because the one thing you can give people solace is to know, if they know you've been through it, that they can make it. So I don't doubt his personal commitment to individuals. But you know what? I know he had no commitment to the automobile industry. He said, let it go bankrupt, period. Let it drop out. All this talk, we saved 1 million jobs. 200,000 people are working today. And I've never met two guys who are more down on America across the board. We're told everything's going bad. There's 5.2 million new jobs, private sector jobs. We need more, but 5.2 million. If they'd get out of the way, and let us pass the tax cut for the middle class, make it permanent. If they get out of the way and pass the jobs bill, if they get out of the way and let us allow 14 million people who are struggling to stay in their homes because their mortgages are upside down, but they never missed a mortgage payment, just get out of the way. Stop talking about how you care about people. Show me something. Show me a policy. Show me a policy where you take responsibility. And by the way, they talk about this Great Recession. If it fell out of the sky, like, oh my goodness, where did it come from? It came from this man voting to put 2 wars in a credit card, to at the same time put a prescription drug benefit in the credit card, a $1 trillion tax cut for very wealthy. I was there. I voted against them. I said, no, we can't afford that. And now all of a sudden these guys are so seized with the concern about the debt that they created.
Congressman Ryan.
Let's not forget that they came in with one-party control. When Barack Obama was elected, his party controlled everything. They had the ability to do everything of their choosing, and look at where we are right now. They passed the stimulus. The idea that we could borrow $831 billion, spend it on all these special interest groups, and that it would work out just fine. That unemployment would never get to 8%. It went up above 8% for 43 months. They said that right now, if we just passed this stimulus, the economy would grow at 4%. It's growing at 1.3%.
When could you get it below 6%?
That's what our entire premise of our pro-growth plan for a stronger middle class is all about. Getting the economy growing at 4%, creating 12 million jobs over the next 4 years. Look at just the $90 billion in stimulus. And the vice president was in charge of overseeing this. $90 billion in green pork to campaign contributors and special interest groups. There are, just at the Department of Energy, over 100 criminal investigations that have been launched into just how stimulus spends are being spent.
Martha, look, his colleague runs an investigative committee, spent months and months and months going into this.
This is the Inspector General.
Months and months. They found no evidence of cronyism. And I love my friend here. I'm not allowed to show letters, but go on our website. He sent me 2 letters saying, by the way, can you send me some stimulus money for companies here in the state of Wisconsin? We sent millions of dollars. You know why he said
you did ask for stimulus money?
Sure, he did. By the way,
on 2 occasions, we advocated for constituents who are applying for grants. That's what we do. We do that for all constituents who are applying.
I love that. I love that. This is such a bad program, and he writes me a letter saying, writes the Department of Energy a letter saying, the reason we need this stimulus, it will create growth and jobs. His words. And now he's sitting here looking at me. And by the way, that program, again, investigated. What the Congress said was it was a model. less than 0.4% waste or fraud in the program. And all this talk about cronyism. They investigated, did not find one single piece of evidence. I wish he would just be a little more candid.
Was it a good idea to spend taxpayer dollars on electric cars in Finland or on windmills in China?
Look,
was it a good idea to borrow all this money from countries like China and spend it on all these various different interest groups?
Let me tell you, it was a good idea. It was a good idea. Moody's and others said that this was exactly what we needed. It stopped us from going off the cliff. It set the conditions to be able to grow again. We have, in fact, 4% of those green jobs didn't go under. Went under, it didn't work. It's a better batting average than investment bankers have. They have about a 40% right.
Where are the 5 million green jobs that were being?
I want to move on here to Medicare and entitlements. I think we've gone over this quite enough.
And by the way, any letter you send me, I'll entertain.
I appreciate that, Joe.
Let's talk about Medicare and entitlements. Both Medicare and Social Security are going broke and taking a larger share of the budget in the process. Will benefits for Americans under these programs have to change for the programs to survive, Mr. Ryan?
Absolutely. Medicare and Social Security are going bankrupt. These are indisputable facts. Look, when I look at these programs, we've all had tragedies in our lives. I think about what they've done for my own family. My mom and I had my grandmother move in with us who was facing Alzheimer's. Medicare was there for her, just like it's there for my mom right now, who's a Florida senior. After my dad died, my mom and I got Social Security survivors benefits. Helped me pay for college. It helped her go back to college in her 50s, where she started a small business because of the new skills she got. She paid all of her taxes on the promise that these programs would be there for her. We will honor this promise. And the best way to do it is to reform it for my generation. You see, if you reform these programs for my generation, people 54 and below, you can guarantee they don't change for people in or near retirement, which is precisely what Mitt Romney and I are proposing. Look what Obamacare does. Obamacare takes $716 billion from Medicare to spend on Obamacare. Even their own chief actuary at Medicare backs this up. He says you can't spend the same dollar twice. You can't claim that this money goes to Medicare and Obamacare. And then they put this new Obamacare board in charge of cutting Medicare each and every year in ways that will lead to denied care for current seniors. This board, by the way, it's 15 people. The president's supposed to appoint them next year, and not one of them even has to have medical training. And Social Security, if we don't shore up Social Security, when we run out of the IOUs, when the program goes bankrupt, a 25% across-the-board benefit cut kicks in on current seniors in the middle of their retirement. We're going to stop that from happening. They haven't put a credible solution on the table. He'll tell you about vouchers. He'll say all these things to try and scare people. Here's what we're saying. Give younger people, when they become Medicare eligible, guaranteed coverage options that you can't be denied, including traditional Medicare. Choose your plan, and then Medicare subsidizes your premiums. Not as much for the wealthy people, more coverage for middle-income people, and total out-of-pocket coverage for the poor and the sick. Choice and competition. We would rather have 50 million future seniors determine how their Medicare is delivered to them instead of 15 bureaucrats deciding what, if, where, when they get it.
Vice President Biden, too.
You know, I heard that death panel argument from Sarah Palin. It seems every vice presidential debate I hear this kind of stuff about panels. But let's talk about Medicare. What we did is we saved $716 billion and put it back, applied it to Medicare. We cut the cost of Medicare. We stopped overpaying insurance companies, when doctors and hospitals. The AMA supported what we did. AARP endorsed what we did. And it extended the life of Medicare to 2024. They want to wipe this all out. It also gave more benefits. Any senior out there, ask yourself, do you have more benefits today? You do. If you're near the donut hole, you have $800, $600 more to help your prescription drug costs. You get wellness visits without copays. They wipe all of this out, and Medicare becomes insolvent in 2016. Number one. Number two, guaranteed benefit. It's a voucher. When they first proposed, when the congressman had his first voucher program, the CBO said it would cost $6,400 a year, Martha, more for every senior 55 and below when they got there. He knew that, yet he got all the guys in Congress and women in the Republican Party to vote for it. Governor Romney, knowing that, said, I would sign it were I there. Who you believe? The AMA? Me? a guy who's fought his whole life for this, or somebody who would actually put in motion a plan that knowingly added $6,400 a year more to the cost of Medicare. Now they got a new plan. Trust me, it's not going to cost you any more. Folks, follow your instincts on this one. And with regard to Social Security, we will not privatize it. If we had listened to Romney, Governor Romney, and the congressman during the Bush years, imagine where all those seniors would be now if their money had been in the market. Their ideas are old and their ideas are bad, and they eliminate the guarantee of Medicare.
Here's the problem. They got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, turning Medicare into a piggy bank for Obamacare. Their own actuary from the administration came to Congress and said, 1 out of 6 hospitals and nursing homes are going to go out of business as a result of this.
That's not what they said.
7.4 million seniors are projected to lose the current Medicare Advantage coverage they have. That's a $3,200 benefit cut.
That didn't
what we're
happen.
saying,
more people signed
these are
up.
from your own actuaries.
More people signed up for Medicare Advantage after the change.
What they're saying,
nobody is.
Mr. Vice President,
down.
I know,
no, this
Mr. Vice President, I know you're under a lot of duress to make up for lost ground. But I think people will be better served if we don't keep interrupting each other.
Well, don't take all the 4 minutes then.
We're saying don't change benefits for people 55 and above. They already organize their retirement around these promises.
Let me ask you this.
What
what is your specific plan for seniors who really can't afford to make up the difference in the value of what you call a premium support plan and others call a voucher?
100% coverage for
them. That's what
we're saying. So we're saying income adjust these premium support payments by taking down the subsidies for wealthy people. Look, this is a plan. By the way, that $6,400 number, it was misleading then. It's totally inaccurate now. This is a plan that's bipartisan. It's a plan I put together with a prominent Democrat senator from Oregon.
There's not one Democrat who endorses it. Not one Democrat who signed
Our partner
the plan.
is a Democrat from Oregon.
And he said he does no longer support you for that.
We put it together with the former Clinton budget director.
Who
this
disavows it.
This idea came from the Clinton Commission to Save Medicare, chaired by Senator John Breaux. Here's the point, Martha.
Which was rejected.
If we don't fix this problem pretty soon, then current seniors get cut. Here's the problem. 10,000 people are retiring every single day in America today, and they will for 20 years. That's not a political thing.
Martha,
that's
if
a
we
math
just
thing.
did one thing, if they just allow Medicare to bargain for the cost of drugs like Medicaid can, that would save $156 billion right off the bat.
And it would deny seniors choices. It has a
Seniors are
restricted
not
formula.
denied. So
Absolutely.
They are not denied. Look, folks, all you seniors out there, have you been denied choices? Have you lost Medicare Advantage?
Because it's working well right now.
Signed up? Because
Vice
we
President
changed the
Biden,
law.
let me ask you, if it could help solve the problem, why not very slowly raise the Medicare eligibility age by 2 years, as Congressman Ryan suggests?
Look, I was there when we did that with Social Security in 1983. I was one of 8 people sitting in the room that included Tip O'Neill negotiating with President Reagan. We all got together, and everybody said, as long as everybody's in the deal, and everybody is making some sacrifice, we can find a way. We made the system solvent to 2033. We will not, though, be part of any voucher plan eliminating it. The voucher says, Mom, when you're 65, go out there, shop for the best insurance you can get. You're out of Medicare. You can buy back in if you want with this voucher, which will not keep pace. Will not keep pace with health care costs. Because if it did keep pace with health care costs, there would be no savings. That's why they go the voucher. We will be no part of a voucher program or the privatization of Social Security.
A voucher is you go to your mailbox, get a check, and buy something. Nobody's proposing that. Hey, Barack Obama, 4 years ago, running for president, said, if you don't have any fresh ideas, use stale tactics to scare voters. If you don't have a good record to run on, paint your opponent as someone people should run from. Make a big election
You were
about
one of the
small
few
ideas.
lawmakers to stand with President Bush when he was seeking to partially privatize Social Security.
For younger people, what we said then, and what I've always agreed, is let younger Americans have a voluntary choice of making their money work faster for them within the Social Security system. That's not what Mitt Romney's proposing. What we're saying is no changes for anybody 55 and above.
What Mitt Romney is proposing.
And then the kinds of changes we're talking about for younger people like myself, is don't increase the benefits for wealthy people as fast as everybody else. Slowly raise the retirement age over time. It wouldn't get to the age of 70 until the year 2103, according to the actuaries. Now, here's the
quickly, Vice President.
Quickly. The bottom line here is that all the studies show that if we went with Social Security proposal made by Mitt Romney, if you're 40, in your 40s now, you'll pay $2,600 a year more. You get $2,600 a year less in Social Security. If you're in your 20s now, you get $4,700 a year less. The idea of changing, and change being in this case to cut the benefits for people without taking other action you could do to make it work, is absolutely the wrong way. These guys haven't been big on Medicare from the beginning. Their party's not been big on Medicare from the beginning, and they've always been about Social Security as little as you can do. Look, folks, use your common sense. Who do you trust on this? A man who introduced a bill that would raise it $6,400 a year, knowing it and passing it, and Romney saying he'd sign it, or me and the president?
That statistic was completely misleading, but more importantly,
they were the facts, right?
This is what politicians do when they don't have a record to run on. Try to scare people from voting for you. If you don't get ahead of this problem, it's going to tax
Medicare beneficiaries have more benefits.
We're going to move on to a very simple question to you.
Medicare and Social Security did so much for my own family. We are not going to jeopardize this program, but we have to save it.
You are jeopardizing the program. You're changing the program from a guaranteed benefit to premium support, whatever you call it. The bottom line is people are going to have to pay more money out of their pocket. And the families I know, the families I come from, they don't have the money to pay more.
That's why we're saying more for lower income people and less for higher income people.
I would like to move on to a very simple question for both of you, and something tells me I won't get a very simple answer, but let me ask you this.
I gave you a simple answer. He's raising the cost of Medicare.
Okay, on to taxes. If your ticket is elected, who will pay more in taxes, who will pay less? And we're starting with Vice President Biden for 2 minutes.
The middle class will pay less, and people making $1 million or more will begin to contribute slightly more. Let me give you one concrete example. The continuation of the Bush tax cuts. We are arguing that the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy should be allowed to expire. Of the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy, $800 billion of that goes to people making a minimum of $1 million. We see no justification in these economic times for those, and they're patriotic Americans. They're not asking for this continued tax cut. They're not suggesting it, but my friends are insisting on it. 120,000 families, by continuing that tax cut, will get an additional $500 billion in tax relief in the next 10 years, and their income is an average of $8 million. We want to extend permanently the middle class tax cut permanently from the Bush middle class tax cut. These guys won't allow us to. You know what they're saying? We say, let's have a vote. Let's have a vote on the middle class tax cut, and let's have a vote on the upper tax cut. Let's go ahead and vote on it. They're saying no. They're holding hostage the middle class tax cut to the super wealthy. And on top of that, they got another tax cut coming. That's $5 trillion that all the studies point out will, in fact, give another $250 million, $250,000 a year to those 120,000 families, and raise taxes for people who are middle income with a child by $2,000 a year. This is unconscionable. There is no need for this. The middle class got knocked on their heels. The Great Recession crushed them. They need some help now. The last people who need help are 120,000 families for another $500 billion tax cut over the next 10 years.
Congressman.
Our entire premise of these tax reform plans is to grow the economy and create jobs. It's a plan that's estimated to create 7 million jobs. Now, we think that government taking 28% of a family and business's income is enough. President Obama thinks that the government ought to be able to take as much as 44.8% of a small business's income. Look, if you taxed every person in successful small business making over $250,000 at 100%, it only run the government for 98 days. If everybody who paid income taxes last year, including successful small businesses, doubled their income taxes this year, we'd still have a $300 billion deficit. You see, there aren't enough rich people and small businesses to tax to pay for all their spending. And so the next time you hear them say, don't worry about it, we'll get a few wealthy people to pay their fair share, watch out, middle class, the tax bill is coming to you. That's why we're saying we need fundamental tax reform. Let's take a look at it this way. 8 out of 10 businesses, they file their taxes as individuals, not as corporations. And where I come from, overseas, which is Lake Superior, the Canadians, they drop their tax rates to 15%. The average tax rate on businesses in the industrialized world is 25%, and the president wants the top effective tax rate on successful small businesses to go above 40%. 2/3 of our jobs come from small businesses. This one tax would actually tax about 53% of small business income. It's expected to cost us 710,000 jobs. And you know what? It doesn't even pay for 10% of their proposed deficit spending increases. What we are saying is lower tax rates across the board and close loopholes primarily to the higher income people. We have 3 bottom lines. Don't raise the deficit, don't raise taxes on the middle class, and don't lower the share of income that is borne by the high income earners. He'll keep saying this $5 trillion plan, I suppose. It's been discredited by 6 other studies, and even their own deputy campaign manager acknowledged that it wasn't correct.
Well, let's talk about this 20%. You have refused, and again, to offer specifics on how you pay for that 20% across the board tax cut. Do you actually have the specifics, or are you still working on it, and that's why you won't tell voters?
Different than this administration, we actually want to have big bipartisan agreements. You see, I understand.
Do you have the specifics? Do you have the math? You know exactly what you're doing.
Look at what Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did. They worked together out of a framework to lower tax rates and broaden the base, and they worked together to fix that. What we're saying is, here's our framework. Lower tax rates 20%. We raise about $1.2 trillion through income taxes. We forego about $1.1 trillion in loopholes and deductions. And so what we're saying is, deny those loopholes and deductions to higher income taxpayers so that more of their income is taxed, which has a broader base of taxation, so we can lower tax rates across the board. Now, here's why I'm saying this. What we're saying is, here's the framework.
I hope I'm going to get time to respond to this.
You'll get time.
We want to work with Congress on how best to achieve this. That means successful. Look,
no specifics again.
What we're saying is lower tax rates 20%, start with the wealthy, work with Congress to do it.
You guarantee this math will add up?
Absolutely. 6 studies have guaranteed. 6 studies have verified that this math adds up. But
Vice President Biden.
Look,
Vice President Biden.
Let me translate. Let me have a chance to translate.
I'll come back in a second then, right?
First of all, I was there when Ronald Reagan tax rates were. He gave specifics of what he was going to cut. No, number one, in terms of tax expenditures. Number two, 97% of the small businesses in America make less than $250,000. Let me tell you who some of those other small businesses are. Hedge funds that make $600–800 million a year. That's what they count as small businesses because they're pass through. Let's look at how sincere they are. Governor Romney on 60 Minutes, I guess it was about 10 days ago, was asked, Governor, you pay 14% on $20 million. Someone making $50,000 pays more than that. Do you think that's fair? He said, oh, yes, that's fair. That's fair. And they're going to talk about, you think these guys are going to go out there and cut those loopholes? The biggest loophole they take advantage of is the carried interest loophole and capital gains loophole. They exempt that. Now, there's not enough. The reason why the AEI study, the American Enterprise Institute study, the Tax Policy Center study, the reason they all say taxes will go up in the middle class, the only way you can find $5 trillion in loopholes is cut the mortgage deduction for middle class people, cut the health care deduction for middle class people, take away their ability to get a tax break to send their kids to college. That's why they arrive.
Is he wrong about that?
He is wrong about that. You can cut tax rates by 20%. And still preserve these important preferences for middle-class taxpayers.
Not mathematically possible.
It is mathematically possible. It's been done before. It's precisely what we're proposing.
It has never been done before.
It's been done a couple of times, actually.
It has never been
Jack
done
Kennedy
before.
lowered tax rates, increased growth. Ronald Reagan.
Now you're Jack Kennedy.
Ronald Reagan. Republicans and Democrats have worked together on this. I understand you guys aren't used to doing bipartisan deals.
But we've told each other what we're going to do. When we did it with Reagan, he said, here are the things we're going to cut.
Framework. Let's work together to fill in the details. That's exactly. That's how you get things done. You work with Congress. Look, let me say it this way.
That's coming from the Republican Congress working bipartisanly.
Mitt Romney.
7% rating.
Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, where 87% of the legislators he served with were Democrats. He didn't demonize them. He didn't demagogue them. He met with those party leaders every week. He reached across the aisle. He didn't compromise principles.
And
he found common ground, and he balanced the budget.
So if he did such a great job,
he balanced the budget 4 times without raising taxes.
Why isn't he even contesting Massachusetts?
Vice President, what would you suggest beyond raising taxes on the wealthy that would substantially reduce
Just let the taxes expire like they're supposed to on those millionaires. We can't afford $800 billion going to people making a minimum of $1 million. They do not need it, Martha. Those 120,000 families make $8 million a year. Middle-class people need the help. Why does my friend cut out the tuition tax credit for them? Why does he go after the child care?
Can you declare anything off limits?
Why do they
Can
do
you
that?
declare anything off limits?
Yeah, we're saying close loopholes on high-interest people.
Home mortgage deduction.
For higher-income people. Here.
Can you guarantee that no one
taxes,
making less than $100,000 have a mortgage deduction impacted?
This taxes a million small businesses. He keeps trying to make you think that it's just some movie star or hedge fund guy or
97% of the small businesses make less than $250,000 a year, would not be affected.
You know it hits a million people. This taxes a million people? A million small businesses?
Does it tax 97% of the American businesses?
It taxed a million small businesses who are our greatest job creators.
I wish I could get it. The greatest job creators.
And you're going to increase the defense budget. And you're going to increase the defense budget.
We're just not going to cut the defense budget like they're proposing.
They said $2 billion.
That's not
$2 trillion.
accurate.
More
We're
than
talking
that.
about
No, so
preventing.
no massive
No, we're saying
defense increase.
Okay, you want to get into defense now?
Yes, I do.
So,
because that's another math question.
Right, okay.
How do you do that?
So they proposed a $478 billion cut to defense to begin with. Now we have another $500 billion cut to defense that's lurking on the horizon. They insisted upon that cut being involved in the debt negotiations. And so now we have a $1 trillion
Let's put the automatic
cut.
defense cuts
Right,
aside.
okay.
Let's
So
put those aside. No one wants that. But I want to know how you do the math and have this increase in defense
$2 trillion.
You don't cut defense by $1 trillion. That's what we're talking about.
And
The
what
additional
national
trillion.
security issues
Who's cutting it by
justify
$1
an
trillion?
increase?
We're going to cut 80,000 soldiers, 20,000 Marines, 120 cargo planes. We're going to push the Joint Strike
Drawing
Fighter
down
out. We're cutting
one
missile
more
defense.
and one more.
If these cuts go through, our Navy will be the smallest it has been since before World War I. This invites weakness. Look, do we believe in peace through strength? You bet we do. And that means you don't impose these devastating cuts on our military. So we're saying don't cut the military by $1 trillion. Not increase it by $1 trillion. Don't cut it by $1 trillion.
Quickly, Vice President Biden on this.
Look,
I want to move on.
We don't cut it. And I might add, this so-called, I know we don't want to use the fancy word sequester, this automatic cut, that was part of a debt deal that they asked for. And let me tell you what my friend said at a press conference announcing his support of the deal. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, we've been looking for this moment for a long time.
Can I tell you what that meant? We've been looking for bipartisanship for a long time.
And so the bipartisanship is what he voted for, the automatic cuts in defense if they didn't act. And beyond that, they asked for another. Look, the military says we need a smaller, leaner army. We need more special forces. We don't need more M1 tanks. What we need is more UAVs.
Some of the military. I know that's something
Not some of the military. That was the decision of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recommended to us and agreed to by the president.
Who answered to a
facts.
civilian leader?
They made the recommendation first.
Okay, let's move on to Afghanistan.
Can I get into that
I'd
for a
like to
second?
move on to Afghanistan, please. And that's one of the biggest expenditures this country has made, in dollars and, more importantly, in lives. We just passed the sad milestone of losing 2,000 U.S. troops there in this war. More than 50 of them were killed this year by the very Afghan forces we are trying to help. Now, we've reached the recruiting goal for Afghan forces. We've degraded al-Qaeda. So tell me, why not leave now? What more can we really accomplish? Is it worth more American lives?
We don't want to lose the gains we've gotten. We want to make sure that the Taliban does not come back in and give al-Qaeda a safe haven. We agree with the administration on their 2014 transition. Look, when I think about Afghanistan, I think about the incredible job that our troops have done. You've been there more than the two of us combined. First time I was there in 2002, it was amazing to me what they were facing. When I went to the Arghandab Valley in Kandahar before the surge, I sat down with a young private in the 82nd from the Menominee Indian Reservation who would tell me what he did every day, and I was in awe. And to see what they had in front of them, and then to go back there in December, to go throughout Helmand with the Marines, to see what they had accomplished, it's nothing short of amazing. What we don't want to do is lose the gains we've gotten. Now, we've disagreed from time to time on a few issues. We would have more likely taken into account the recommendations from our commanders, General Petraeus, Admiral Mullen, on troop levels throughout this year's fighting season. We've been skeptical about negotiations with the Taliban, especially while they're shooting at us. But we want to see the 2014 transition be successful, and that means we want to make sure our commanders have what they need to make sure that it is successful so that this does not once again become a launching pad for terrorists.
Vice
Martha,
President Biden.
let's keep our eye on the ball. The reason I've been in and out of Afghanistan and Iraq 20 times. I've been up in the Konar Valley. I've been throughout that whole country, mostly in a helicopter and sometimes in a vehicle. The fact is, we went there for one reason, to get those people who killed Americans, Al-Qaeda. We've decimated Al-Qaeda Central. We have eliminated Osama bin Laden. That was our purpose. And in fact, in the meantime, what we said we would do, we would help train the Afghan military. It's their responsibility to take over their own security. That's why with 49 of our allies in Afghanistan, we've agreed on a gradual drawdown, so we're out of there by the year 2014. My friend and the governor say it's based on conditions, which means it depends. It does not depend for us. It is the responsibility of the Afghans to take care of their own security. We have trained over 315,000, mostly without incident. There have been more than 24 cases of green on blue where Americans have been killed. If the measures the military has taken do not take hold, we will not go on joint patrols. We will not train in the field. We'll only train in the Army bases that exist there. But we are leaving. We are leaving in 2014, period. And in the process, we're going to be saving over the next 10 years another $800 billion. We've been in this war for over a decade. The primary objective is almost completed. Now all we're doing is putting the Kabul government in a position to be able to maintain their own security. It's their responsibility, not America's.
What conditions could justify staying, Congressman Ryan?
We don't want to stay. Look, one of my best friends in Janesville, a reservist, is at a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan right now. Our wives are best friends, our daughters are best friends. I want him and all of our troops to come home as soon and safely as possible. We want to make sure that 2014 is successful. That's why we want to make sure that we give our commanders what they say they need to make it successful. We don't want to extend beyond 2014. That's the point we're making. You know, if it was just this, I feel like we would be able to call this a success, but it's not. What we are witnessing as we turn on our television screens these days is the absolute unraveling of the Obama foreign policy. Problems are growing at home, but problems are growing abroad, but jobs aren't growing here at home.
Let me go back to this. He says we're absolutely leaving in 2014. You're saying that's not an absolute, but you won't talk about what conditions would justify.
Do you know why we say that? Because we don't want to broadcast to our enemies, put a date on your calendar, wait us out, and then come back.
But you agree with the timeline.
We do agree. We do agree with the timeline and the transition. But what any administration will do in 2013 is assess the situation to see how best to complete this timeline. What we do not want to do is give our allies reason to trust us less, and our enemies more. We don't want to embolden our enemies to hold and wait out for us and then take over the country.
Martha, that's a bizarre statement.
That's why we want to make sure. No,
that's a bizarre statement since 49 of our allies, hear me, 49 of our allies signed on to this position.
And we're reading that they want to
49. 49 of our allies said out in 2014. It's the responsibility of the Afghans. We have other responsibilities.
Do you think this timeline, but we
agree
have soldiers and Marines, we have Afghan forces murdering our forces over there. The Taliban is, do you think, taking advantage of this timeline?
Oh, look, the Taliban, what we found out, and you saw it in Iraq, Martha, unless you set a timeline, Baghdad in the case of Iraq and Kabul in the case of Afghanistan will not step up. They're happy to let us continue to do the job. International security forces do the job. The only way they step up is say, fellas, we're leaving. We've trained you. Step up. Step up.
Let me go
That's
back.
the only way it works.
Let me go back to the surge troops that we put in there. And you brought this up, Congressman Ryan. I have talked to a lot of troops. I've talked to senior officers who were concerned that the surge troops were pulled out during the fighting season, and some of them saw that as a political move. So can you tell me, Vice President Biden, what was the military reason for bringing those surge troops home before the fighting season ended?
For bringing those, by the way, when the president announced the surge, you'll remember, Martha, he said the surge will be out by the end of the summer. The military said the surge will be out. Nothing political about this. Before the surge occurred, so you be a little straight with me here, too. Before the surge occurred, we said they'll be out by the end of the summer. That's what the military said. The reason for that is...
The military follows orders. Trust me, there are people who are concerned about pulling out.
There are people that are concerned, but not the Joint Chiefs. That was their recommendation in the Oval Office to the President of the United States of America. I sat there. I'm sure you'll find someone who disagrees with the Pentagon. I'm positive you'll find that within the military. But that's not the case here. And secondly, the reason why the military said that is you cannot wait and have a cliff. It takes, months and months and months to draw down forces.
Let me try and illustrate the issue here, because I think this can get a little confusing. We've all met with General Allen and General Scaparrotti in Afghanistan to talk about fighting seasons. Here's the way it works. The mountain passes fill in with snow. The Taliban and the terrorists and the Haqqani and the Quetta come over from Pakistan to fight our men and women. When it fills in with snow, they can't do it. That's what we call fighting seasons. In the warm months, fighting gets really high. In the winter, it goes down. And so when Admiral Mullen and General Petraeus came to Congress and said, if you pull these people out before the fighting season is end, it puts people more at risk. That's the problem. Yes, we drew 22,000 troops down last month, but the remaining troops that are there, who still have the same mission to prosecute counterinsurgency, are doing it with fewer people. That makes them less safe. We're sending fewer people out in all these hotspots to do the same job that they were supposed to do a month ago.
Because we
took 22,000 people out
for them to do it. Over to the Afghan troops we trained. No one got pulled out that didn't get filled in by trained Afghan personnel. And he's conflating two issues. The fighting season that Petraeus was talking about and Admiral Mullen was the fighting season this spring. That's what he was talking about. We did not pull them out.
The calendar works the same every year.
It does work the same every year.
And spring, summer, fall. It's warm or it's not. They're still fighting us. They're still coming over the passes. They're still coming in to Zabul, to Kunar, to all of these areas, but we are sending fewer people to the front to fight them, and that's
right, because that's the Afghan responsibility. We've trained them.
Not in the East.
Let's move to another war.
Not in the East.
RC East,
the most dangerous place in the world.
That's why we don't want to send fewer people to do the job.
That's why we should send Americans in to do the job instead of the... You'd rather Americans be going in and doing the job instead of the
trains. We are already sending Americans to do the job, but fewer of them.
That's right. We're sending in more Afghans to do the job. Afghans to do the job.
Let's move to another war, the civil war in Syria, where there are estimates that more than 25,000, 30,000 people have now been killed. In March of last year, President Obama explained the military action taken in Libya by saying it was in the national interest to go in and prevent further massacres from occurring there. So why doesn't the same logic apply in Syria, Vice President Biden?
It's a different country. It is 5 times as large geographically. It has 1/5 the population, that is Libya, 1/5 the population, 5 times as large geographically. It's in a part of the world where you're not going to see whatever would come from that war. It seep into a regional war. You are in a country that is heavily populated in the midst of the most dangerous area in the world. And in fact, if in fact it blows up and the wrong people gain control, it's going to have impact on the entire region, causing potentially regional wars. We are working hand and glove with the Turks, with the Jordanians, with the Saudis, and with all the people in the region, attempting to identify the people who deserve the help so that when Assad goes, and he will go, there will be a legitimate government that follows on, not an al-Qaeda-sponsored government that follows on. And all this loose talk of my friend Governor Romney and the congressman about how we could do so much more in there. What more would they do other than put American boots on the ground? The last thing America needs is to get in another ground war in the Middle East, requiring tens of thousands, if not well over 100,000 American forces. They are the facts. They are the facts. Now, every time the governor is asked about this, he doesn't say anything. He goes up with a whole lot of verbiage, but when he gets pressed, he says, no, he would not do anything different than we are doing now. Are they proposing putting American troops on the ground? Putting American aircraft in the airspace? Is that what they're proposing? If they do, they should speak up and say so. But that's not what they're saying. We are doing it exactly like we need to do to identify those forces who, in fact, will provide for a stable government and not cause a regional Sunni-Shia war when Bashir Assad falls.
Congressman Ryan.
Nobody is proposing to send troops to Syria, American troops. Now, let me say it this way. How would we do things differently? We wouldn't refer to Bashar Assad as a reformer when he's killing his own civilians with his Russian-provided weapons. We wouldn't be outsourcing our foreign policy to the United Nations, giving Vladimir Putin veto power over our efforts to try and deal with this issue. He's vetoed 3 of them. Hillary Clinton went to Russia to try and convince them not to do so. They thwarted her efforts. She said they were on the wrong side of history. She was right about that. This is just one more example of how the Russia reset's not working. And so where are we? After international pressure mounted, then President Obama said Bashar Assad should go. It's been over a year. The man has slaughtered tens of thousands of his own people, and more foreign fighters are spilling into this country. So the longer this has gone on, the more groups like al-Qaeda are going in. We could have more easily identified the Free Syrian Army, the Freedom Fighters, working with our allies, the Turks, the Qataris, the Saudis, had we had a better plan in place to begin with, working through our allies. But no, we waited for Kofi Annan to try and come up with an agreement through the UN. That bought Bashar Assad time. We gave Russia veto power over our efforts through the UN. And meanwhile, about 30,000 Syrians are dead.
What would my friend do differently? If you notice, he never answers the question.
No, we would not be going through the UN on all of these things.
You don't go through the UN. We are in the process now and have been for months in making sure that help, humanitarian aid, as well as other aid and training is getting to those forces that we believe, the Turks believe, the Jordanians believe, the Saudis believe are the free forces inside of Syria. That is underway. Our allies were all on the same page, NATO as well as our Arab allies, in terms of trying to get a settlement. That was their idea. We're the ones that said enough. With regard to the reset not working, the fact of the matter is that Russia has a different interest in Syria than we do, and that's not in our interest.
What happens if Assad does not fall? Congressman Ryan, what happens to the region? What happens if he hangs on? What happens if he does?
Then Iran keeps their greatest ally in the region. He's a sponsor of terrorism. He'll probably continue slaughtering his people. We and the world community will lose our credibility on this. Look, he mentioned the reset.
So what would Romney Ryan do about that credibility?
Well, we agree with the same red line, actually, they do on chemical weapons, but not putting American troops in other than to secure those chemical weapons. They're right about that. But what we should have done earlier is work with those freedom fighters, those dissidents in Syria. We should not have called Bashar Assad a reformer. And we should not have waited for Russia to give us the green light. We should not have waited for Russia to give us the green light at the UN to do something about it. They're still arming the man. Iran is flying flights over Iraq.
And the opposition is being armed.
To help Bashar Assad. And by the way, if we had the status of forces agreement that the vice president said he would bet his vice presidency on in Iraq, we probably would have been able to prevent that. But he failed to achieve that as well. Again,
let me ask you quickly, what's your criteria for intervention?
Yeah.
in Syria?
Worldwide.
What is in the national interest of the American people?
How about
what is in the
humanitarian
national
interest?
security of the American people? It's got to be in the strategic national interest of our country.
No humanitarian.
Each situation will come up with its own set of circumstances, but putting American troops on the ground, that's got to be within the national security interest of the American people.
I want to. We're almost out of
things
time
like
here.
embargoes and sanctions and overflights. Those are things that don't put American troops on the ground. But if you're talking about putting American troops on the ground, only in our national security interests.
I want to move on, and I want to return home for these last few questions. This debate is indeed historic. We have two Catholic candidates, first time on a stage such as this. And I would like to ask you both to tell me what role your religion has played in your own personal views on abortion. Please talk about how you came to that decision. Talk about how your religion played a part in that. And please, this is such an emotional issue for so many people in this country. Please talk personally about this, if you could. Congressman Ryan.
I don't see how a person can separate their public life from their private life or from their faith. Our faith informs us in everything we do. My faith informs me about how to take care of the vulnerable, about how to make sure that people have a chance in life. Now, you want to ask basically why I'm pro-life? It's not simply because of my Catholic faith. That's a factor, of course. But it's also because of reason and science. You know, I think about 10.5 years ago, my wife Jana and I went to Mercy Hospital in Janesville, where I was born, for our 7-week ultrasound for our firstborn child. And we saw that heartbeat. Our little baby was in the shape of a bean. And to this day, we have nicknamed our firstborn child, Liza, Bean. Now, I believe that life begins at conception. That's why, those are the reasons why I'm pro-life. Now, I understand this is a difficult issue, and I respect people who don't agree with me on this, but the policy of a Romney administration will be to oppose abortion with the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. What troubles me more is how this administration has handled all of these issues. Look at what they're doing through Obamacare with respect to assaulting the religious liberties of this country. They're infringing upon our first freedom, the freedom of religion, by infringing on Catholic charities, Catholic churches, Catholic hospitals. Our church should not have to sue our federal government to maintain their religious liberties. And with respect to abortion, the Democratic Party used to say they want it to be safe, legal, and rare. Now, they support it without restriction and with taxpayer funding. Taxpayer funding in Obamacare, taxpayer funding with foreign aid. The vice president himself went to China and said that he sympathized or wouldn't second guess their one-child policy of forced abortions and sterilizations. That, to me, is pretty extreme.
Vice President Biden.
My religion defines who I am. And I've been a practicing Catholic my whole life. It has particularly informed my social doctrine. Catholic social doctrine talks about taking care of those who can't take care of themselves. people who need help. With regard to abortion, I accept my church's position on abortion as what we call de fide doctrine. Life begins at conception. That's the church's judgment. I accept it in my personal life. But I refuse to impose it on equally devout Christians and Muslims and Jews. And I just refuse to impose that on others, unlike my friend here, the congressman. I do not believe that we have a right to tell other people that women, they can't control their body. It's a decision between them and their doctor. In my view, in the Supreme Court, I'm not going to interfere with that. With regard to the assault on the Catholic Church, let me make it absolutely clear. No religious institution, Catholic or otherwise, including Catholic Social Services, Georgetown Hospital, Mercy Hospital, any hospital, none has to either refer for contraception, none has to pay for contraception, none has to be a vehicle to get contraception in any insurance policy they provide. That is a fact. That is a fact. Now, with regard to the way in which we differ, my friend says that well, I guess he accepts Governor Romney's position now, because in the past he has argued that there's rape and forcible rape. He's argued that in the case of rape or incest, it would be a crime to engage in having an abortion. I just fundamentally disagree with my friend.
Congressman Ryan.
All I'm saying is if you believe that life begins at conception, that therefore doesn't change the definition of life. That's a principle. The policy of a Romney administration is to oppose abortion with exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. Now, I've got to take issue with the Catholic Church and religious liberty.
You have.
If they agree with you, then why would they keep suing you? It's a distinction without a difference.
I want to go back to the abortion question here. If the Romney-Ryan ticket is elected, should those who believe that abortion should remain legal be worried?
We don't think that unelected judges should make this decision, that people through their elected representatives and reaching a consensus in society through the democratic process should make this determination.
The next president will get 1 or 2 Supreme Court nominees. That's how close Roe v. Wade is. Just ask yourself, with Robert Bork being the chief advisor on the court for Mr. Romney, who do you think he's likely to appoint? Do you think he's likely to appoint someone like Scalia or someone else on the court far right that would outlaw abortion? I suspect that would happen. I guarantee you that will not happen. We picked 2 people. We picked people open-minded. They've been good justices. So keep an eye on the Supreme Court.
Was there a litmus test on them?
There was no litmus test. We picked people who had an open mind, did not come with an agenda.
I'm going to move on to this closing question because we are running out of time. Certainly know, and you've said it here tonight, that the 2 of you respect our troops enormously. Your son has served, and perhaps someday your children will serve as well. I recently spoke to a highly decorated soldier who said that this presidential campaign has left him dismayed. He told me, quote, "The ads are so negative and they are all tearing down each other rather than building up the country." What would you say to that American hero about this campaign? And at the end of the day, are you ever embarrassed by the tone? Vice President Biden.
I would say to him the same thing I say to my son, who did serve a year in Iraq, that we only have one truly sacred obligation as a government. That's to equip those we send into harm's way and care for those who come home. That's the only sacred obligation we have. Everything else falls behind that. I would also tell him that the fact that this decorated soldier you talked about, fought for his country, that should be honored. He should not be thrown into a category of the 47% who don't pay their taxes while he was out there fighting and not having to pay taxes and somehow not taking responsibility. I would also tell him that there are things that have occurred in this campaign and occurred in every campaign that I'm sure both of us regret anyone having said, particularly in these special new groups that can go out there, raise all the money they want, not have to identify themselves and say the most scurrilous things about the other candidate. It's an abomination. But the bottom line here is I'd ask that hero you referenced to take a look at whether or not Governor Romney or President Obama has the conviction to help lift up the middle class, restore them to where they were before this great recession hit and they got wiped out, or whether or not he's going to continue to focus on taking care of only the very wealthy, not asking them to pay any part of the deal to bring back the middle class, the economy of this country. I would ask him to take a look at whether the President of the United States has acted wisely in the use of force, and whether or not the slipshod comments being made by my friend or by Governor Romney serve our interests very well. But there are things that have been said in campaigns that I find not very appealing.
Congressman Ryan.
First of all, I'd thank him to his service to our country. Second of all, I'd say we are not going to impose these devastating cuts on our military, which compromises their mission and their safety. And then I would say you have a president who ran for president 4 years ago promising hope and change, who has now turned his campaign into attack, blame, and defame. You see, if you don't have a good record to run on, then you paint your opponent as someone to run from. That was what President Obama said in 2008. It's what he's doing right now. Look at all the string of broken promises. If you like your health care plan, you can keep it. Try telling that to the 20 million people who are projected to lose their health insurance if Obamacare goes through, or the 7.4 million seniors who are going to lose it. Or remember when he said this, I guarantee if you make less than $250,000, your taxes won't go up. Of the 21 tax increases in Obamacare, 12 of them hit the middle class. Or remember when he said health insurance premiums will go down $2,500 per family per year? They've gone up $3,000 and they're expected to go up another $2,400. Or remember when he said, I promise by the end of my first term, I'll cut the deficit in half in 4 years. We've had 4 budgets, $4 trillion deficits. A debt crisis is coming. We can't keep spending and borrowing like this. We can't keep spending money we don't have. Leaders run to problems to fix problems. President Obama has not even put a credible plan on the table in any of his 4 years to deal with this debt crisis. I passed 2 budgets to deal with this. Mitt Romney's put ideas on the table. We've got to tackle this debt crisis before it tackles us. The president likes to say he has a plan. He gave a speech. We asked his budget office, can we see the plan? They sent us to this press secretary. He gave us a copy of the speech. We asked the Congressional Budget Office, tell us what President Obama's plan is to prevent a debt crisis. They said, it's a speech. We can't estimate speeches. You see, that's what we get in this administration, speeches. But we're not getting leadership. Mitt Romney is uniquely qualified to fix these problems. His lifetime of experience, his proven track record of bipartisanship, and what do we have from the president? He broke his big promise to bring people together to solve the country's biggest problems. And what I would tell him is we don't have to settle for this. We can do better than this.
I hope I'll get equal time.
You will get just a few minutes here, a few seconds, really.
The 2 budgets the congressman introduced have eviscerated all the things that the middle class cares about. It will knock 19 million people off of Medicare. It will kick 200,000 children off of early education. It will eliminate the tax credit people have to be able to send their children to college. It cuts education by $450 billion. It does virtually nothing except continue to increase the tax cuts for the very wealthy. And, you know, we've had enough of this. The idea that he's so concerned about these deficits, as I pointed out, he voted to put 2 wars in a credit card. He did.
We're going to the closing statements in a minute.
You're
going to have your
not
closing
raising
statement.
taxes is not cutting taxes. And by the way, our budget,
We have
increased
not
spending
raised
by 3% a year instead of 4.5% like they propose. So not spending more money as much as they say is not a spending
things here just for a minute, and I want to talk to you very briefly before we go to closing statements about your own personal character. If you were elected, what could you both give to this country as a man, as a human being, that no one else could?
Honesty. Well, no one else could. There are plenty of fine people who could lead this country. But what you need are people who, when they say they're going to do something, they go do it. What you need are when people see problems, they offer solutions to fix those problems. We're not getting that. Look, we can grow this economy faster. That's what our 5-point plan for a stronger middle class is all about. It's about getting 12 million jobs, higher take-home pay, getting people out of poverty into the middle class. That means going with proven pro-growth policies that we know work to get people back to work, putting ideas on the table, working with Democrats. That actually works sometimes.
Vice President,
and then
could we get
to
that issue of what you could bring as a man, a human being? And I really am going to keep you to about 15 seconds here.
Well, he gets 40, I get 15.
He didn't have
okay.
40. He didn't have 40.
Now, let me tell you, my record stands for itself. I never say anything I don't mean. Everybody knows whatever I say, I do. And my whole life has been devoted to leveling the playing field for middle-class people, giving them an even break, treating Main Street and Wall Street the same, holding the same responsibility. Look at my record. It's been all about the middle class. They're the people who grow this country. We think you grow this country from the middle out, not from the top down.
Okay, we now turn to the candidates for their closing statements. Thank you, gentlemen. And that coin toss, again, has Vice President Biden starting with the closing statement.
Well, let me say at the outset that I want to thank you, Martha, for doing this, and Senator College. The fact is that we're in a situation where we inherited a god-awful circumstance. People are in real trouble. We acted to move to bring relief to the people who need the most help now. And in the process, we, in case you haven't noticed, we have strong disagreements, but you probably detected my frustration with their attitude about the American people. My friend says that 30% of the American people are takers. Romney points out 47% of the people won't take responsibility. He's talking about my mother and father. He's talking about the places I grew up in, my neighbors in Scranton and Claymont. He's talking about the people that built this country. All they're looking for, Martha, all they're looking for is an even shot. Whenever you give them a shot, they've done it. They've done it. Whenever you've leveled the playing field, they've been able to move. And they want a little bit of peace of mind. And the president and I are not going to rest until that playing field is leveled. They, in fact, have a clear shot, and they have peace of mind. Until they can turn to their kid and say with a degree of confidence, honey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. That's what this is all about.
Congressman Ryan.
I want to thank you as well, Martha, Danville, Kentucky, Senator College, and I want to thank you, Joe. It's been an honor to engage in this critical debate. We face a very big choice. What kind of country are we going to be? What kind of country are we going to give our kids? President Obama, he had his chance. He made his choices. His economic agenda, more spending, more borrowing, higher taxes, a government takeover of health care, it's not working. It's failed to create the jobs we need. 23 million Americans are struggling for work today. 15% of Americans are in poverty. This is not what a real recovery looks like. You deserve better. Mitt Romney and I want to earn your support. We're offering real reforms for a real recovery for every American. Mitt Romney, his experience, his ideas, his solutions, is uniquely qualified to get this job done. At a time when we have a jobs crisis in America, wouldn't it be nice to have a job creator in the White House? The choice is clear. A stagnant economy that promotes more government dependency, or a dynamic, growing economy that promotes opportunity and jobs. Mitt Romney and I will not duck the tough issues. And we will not blame others for the next 4 years. We will take responsibility. And we will not try to replace our founding principles. We will reapply our founding principles. The choice is clear. And the choice rests with you, and we ask you for your vote. Thank you.
And thank you both again. Thank you very much. This concludes the vice presidential debate. Please tune in next Tuesday for the second presidential debate at Hofstra University in New York. I'm Martha Raddatz of ABC News. I do hope all of you go to the polls. Have a good evening.
Welcome back. The vice presidential debate has just wrapped up, and we've got lots of analysis ahead. But first, we're going to look at a clip of Vice President Joe Biden going after Mitt Romney.
But it shouldn't be surprising for a guy who says 47% of the American people are unwilling to take responsibility for their own lives. My friend recently in a speech in Washington said 30% of the American people are takers. These people are my mom and dad, the people I grew up with, my neighbors. They pay more effective tax than Governor Romney pays in his federal income tax.
And now the response from Paul Ryan.
Romney's a good man. He cares about 100% of Americans in this country. And with respect to that quote, I think the vice president very well knows that sometimes the words don't come out of your mouth the right way.
But I always say what I mean.
And I'm back with White House correspondent Jackie Combs and Metro editor Carolyn Ryan. So we finally got the 47%. We were waiting for more than a week, but we got it, and there it was. And Joe Biden was all over it.
Right. A week ago, we sat here, experts that we are, and we predicted that Barack
Our
Obama
excellent punditry,
would
right,
bring
Jackie?
up the 47%.
Yes,
he didn't. Joe Biden did. And, you know, we knew that would happen because President Obama had left it out. And he, you know, Joe Biden throughout this debate tonight, he made a point of, like, always making it Mitt Romney who was the subject of his attack, not the vice president, not Paul Ryan so much. There were some, but mostly he kept the focus on Mitt Romney. But he did in this case also bring it back, not just the 47%, but mention that Paul Ryan had given a speech in which he called 30% of Americans takers.
He brought that up a couple of times, which is probably new to a lot of the people who are watching. It was fascinating to me to watch Ryan's response because, remember, Romney had a very interesting evolution after the 47% tape surfaced. Initially, he said, well, you know...
He defended
it. Yeah, essentially sort of doubled down on this, to use that term. And he evolved to the point where he said this was completely wrong. Now, it felt like a curious response on Ryan's part to talk about this more personal tale about this family in Massachusetts
and defending Mitt Romney,
and
trying to cared about the 100%.
Yeah, try to create, you know, sort of depict him as a generous person, and I don't think that people doubt that he's generous.
And Joe Biden acknowledged, he said, I'm not questioning his personal generosity. It's a policy question.
The one smart thing, and I think, you know, this was what he was ready for, and Ryan clearly prepared for this debate, you know, 200%. I mean, he seemed better prepared in some ways than Biden. But the one thing that he did clearly prepare was the line about you of all people should know that some
words don't come out the right way.
Yes.
Right.
And it was very interesting, again, a thing that the president didn't do was that Biden maybe wasn't rehearsed that, but he came back right away and said, but I always say what I mean.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Which
said
was
that a couple times, yes.
Unlike President Obama, Joe Biden came right back at him, and in a way that was very unscripted and served the purpose of underscoring a central criticism of Mr. Romney, which is that
he doesn't mean
say
what he said.
what he means.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought one other...
Say what he means or mean what he says, yeah.
A fascinating kind of stylistic point for me was it seemed like, now again, we know of Ryan as a disciplined kind of exercise addict, and we know how he prepared for this debate. He seemed so prepared to talk about foreign policy, which had been identified for obvious reasons as a weakness. And he seemed less sure-footed on basic questions of tax policy.
Right.
And of course, he would expect to be pressed on where the loopholes are that they're going to be closed.
Right.
And that seemed like, in some ways, the least confident. And in fact, he went on the attack on foreign policy in a way that, you know, showed some assertiveness and aggressiveness and some confidence.
I think, again, confounding the pundits and all of us here, there was this expectation that he would be on the defensive, Ryan, on foreign policy, being the less experienced one, that he might seem not sure-footed there. He seemed like very practiced. He named every place in Afghanistan that anyone had never heard of.
It was a little
it was a little much at some points. But and certainly for the first 25 minutes of the debate, when it was focused, I think, pretty tough for the administration on Libya a lot of that time, it was certainly Biden who seemed somewhat more on the defensive. I mean, they were defending what was a real problem in Libya. And then it seemed like when they got to the tax part was when Biden caught fire and sort of took over the debate a little bit.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about what viewers thought of the split screen experience, because I have to say, Ryan seemed disciplined and kind of controlled in his movements, and also he seemed respectful when he listened. And I found it rather distracting to see the incredulity and the kind of smile brought to you by the American Dental Association, the kind of blinding smile of Biden so constantly. It felt, as a television viewer, like there was a way of undermining the seriousness of the conversation. And it seemed like, again, Ryan was much more disciplined.
They're playing much more to personality that way, right? Ryan is the kind of super disciplined guy, and Biden is kind of known for kind of going off a little bit. And it did seem like Biden had really adopted that his mission here was, I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to rev up the base. I'm not here to convert, undecided voters. I'm talking to our people, and I want to get them excited, and I want to get them fired up and ready to go.
Yeah. I agree with Carolyn to some extent, a great extent, about the sort of it being disconcerting that Joe Biden is smiling and sort of guffawing internally at some of the things that Paul Ryan was saying, especially when Joe Biden comes to this debate with the kind of negatives he does for being, clownish or maybe just, buffoonery. But I have to say in his defense that it was a number of the things that he was most reacting to were real falsehoods on Paul Ryan's part. And I just made a list of about 6 of them off the top of my head. And Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, first started when they were talking about sanctions against Iran. And there's no one who knows anything who would deny that the sanctions have gotten tougher under this administration and with the global community's support. And so that really seemed to get Joe Biden's goat.
Perfect transition, Jackie. We're going to go to the fact-check desk now. Rick Burke is down in the newsroom with Washington correspondent Annie Lowry to fact-check some of the exchanges between the candidates on Medicare. Rick?
Yes, let's go right to a clip on between the two candidates on seniors' entitlements and Medicare.
If we had listened to Romney, to Governor Romney, and the congressman during the Bush years, imagine where all those seniors would be now if their money had been in the market.
Here's the problem. They got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, turning Medicare into a piggy bank for Obamacare.
So, Annie, for people watching that exchange, what are seniors to believe?
So I think in both instances, the candidates were being somewhat unfair to one another. So we had Congressman Ryan repeating this canard that has been debunked dozens of times, that the Obama administration has cut Medicare in order to pay for the Affordable Care Act, or as it's now known, and even President Obama calls it, Obamacare. This just isn't true. What the bill does is it slows the future pace of Medicare spending growth. It doesn't actually cut from anything, and it uses that to pay for different coverage expansions. And notably, all of that money, none of it's coming from Medicare beneficiaries. It's all coming from hospitals and providers. So this is just over and over again. They keep on repeating it. It's not really true. And notably, Republicans have voted for these same budgetary changes, I think twice, more than once. So they don't really have a lot of standing to make this claim. And then, Vice President Biden is making this argument about Social Security that Republicans would immediately privatize, basically. This is not true, really, either. Governor Romney has proposed doing things like raising the eligibility age and some other proposals, but he's also said that if you are a senior currently, you don't have to worry about any of these changes, though there was obviously a push for privatization back during the Bush years. So he was correct about that. So I think that this is confusing for seniors who are resistant to changes to any of their programs.
So that gives a certain advantage to the Democrats, right? I mean,
yeah, I think so. I think that the Democrats have pounded the Republicans really, really hard for wanting to make, enormous changes to how these programs are run. So if you look at the instance of Medicaid, Congressman Ryan has proposed dramatic changes to that program. Medicare, he's also proposed, pretty significant changes and very, sort of serious caps on spending. And the same thing with Social Security. So they've just really, really been beating them up. But it's one of these places in which Congressman Ryan's plans have been different from Governor Romney's plans. And that's actually opened Governor Romney up to even more criticism than he might have come under, just if it were his own plan.
now they both reassured seniors in a very
yes.
intense, eloquent way.
Yeah.
But there was also a generational split where you said, Biden, I've been there for you throughout my career. Mm-hmm. And then you have this young buck, Ryan, talking about it and saying, I understand, I'm going to be there for those in the future. I'm going to protect seniors now. Mm-hmm. Talk about that, the generational differences.
So, historically, obviously, seniors have tended to vote for Republican candidates. And again, they're very, very resistant to any changes in these programs for obvious reasons. Seniors really like Medicare and they really like Social Security. And those are enormously important programs for protecting them and for keeping them there. So yes, I think that you saw both candidates basically saying, if you are an older person in Florida or an older person in Ohio, we promise that nothing will change for you. Nothing dramatic. But I do think that Vice President Biden was essentially trying to make the case that Governor Romney and Congressman Ryan have proposals that would cause more dramatic changes to these programs. And this is something that the campaigns have been trying to hash out. You've seen the same thing from Romney-Ryan ticket, where they've been arguing that Barack Obama has, forced a government takeover of healthcare and has had a kind of radical changes to it. So I think that that's the kind of argument that they're trying to start.
One last quick question. Did we learn anything more on this from the candidates tonight? Did they shift in any way, or is it the same old lines?
No, I don't think that we learned necessarily much more. And notably, on both sides, you have proposals in which there's a lot of detail that needs to be filled in. Governor Romney has come under a lot of criticism for not sort of filling in the blanks on some of these.
Thank you, Annie. We're going to talk to you a little bit later.
Thanks.
Megan?
Thanks, Rick. For many viewers, the candidate's style and delivery is as important as what they say. Media coach Bill McGowan has advised everyone from Jack Welch to Eli Manning, and he's here with his take on the candidates' performances. So, Bill, stylistically, what struck you about tonight?
Well, it was pretty clear that the vice president came out being coached to be all over Paul Ryan.
He was
do
all over
not
him.
let anything that
Do not let him breathe.
doesn't stand up to the fact-checking stand. I'm just not certain that he didn't go overboard in the smirking and the laughing to himself. I agree with your other guests, a little distracting. And I thought it didn't really, he didn't show the proper kind of respect for his opponent by doing that. I think there are other techniques he could have done. It became a little too regular and a little too intense. And over some of the more serious issues like abortion and the troops, I was worried he was actually going to do it there as well and have it seem almost inappropriate.
Over the line. Paul Ryan had what seemed at the beginning sort of like a nervous tick where he was just drinking every 35 seconds.
He did it literally within the first 40 seconds of the debate. He sat down. He may just suffer
Is
from
that
dry
a nervous
mouth.
tick, or is that just my own perception?
It's a little bit of a nervous tick. He may have a dry mouth, and it may affect his actual delivery, but Joe Biden actually proved tonight he's a camel. He did not drink a drop of water.
He did not even sort of swallow it.
Yeah, exactly.
There were not very many instances of looking directly into the camera. Mm-hmm. You identified one, which I think we're going to look at a clip of now.
Yeah, Biden.
Right.
Situation and talking directly to seniors.
And he was sort of addressing the audience directly. Mm-hmm. There was very little of that, though, in this debate.
Paul Ryan did very, very little of it. Although I think Paul Ryan, interestingly enough, in his closing statement, was much more effective looking directly into the camera. For some reason, the vice president did not. He hardly looked into the camera in his closing statement. And I felt as though overall, Ryan's material, while it may have seemed more tightly scripted, was just tighter in general. I feel like the vice president was a little rambling, a little, he didn't have as firm a shape to his content as Ryan did.
So what did you think was sort of strongest moment for each of the candidates?
Well, I thought Biden just being all over Ryan.
Just the general aggressiveness.
Yeah, I thought the general aggression was good. I also thought there was a good moment where Biden called Ryan on the fact that he asked for stimulus money to go to Wisconsin. I thought Ryan seemed a bit
uncomfortable in that.
Yeah, hit, in the stomach by that a bit.
And was there a moment for Paul Ryan that struck you as being a particularly
I
strong
think
one?
Paul Ryan surprisingly seemed more confident answering the abortion question than Joe Biden did. And I think Democrats would probably think about that question as being a layup for the Democrats. And I sort of feel like the vice president fumbled that question. He seemed very uncertain. His content didn't seem to have the right kind of shape, and I just felt like he missed his opportunity to shine on that question.
Thanks, Bill. We'll be back with you for the next
My pleasure.
presidential
I'll see
debate.
you next one.
Rick Burke is standing by with Assistant Managing Editor Susan Shira with a closer look at some of tonight's foreign policy highlights, including an exchange of the killing of a Libyan ambassador.
Let's go right to that clip.
If we are hit by terrorists, we're going to call it for what it is, a terrorist attack. Our ambassador in Paris has a Marine detachment guarding him. Shouldn't we have a Marine detachment guarding our ambassador in Benghazi, a place where we knew that there was an al-Qaeda cell with arms?
Susan, what's your sense about what Ryan said about our reaction to the Libya bombing?
I think that Congressman Ryan struck fast and hard on an obvious vulnerability for the Obama administration. The attack in Benghazi obviously exposed security flaws, and so I think that he pressed the attack hard and effectively. As our fact checkers noted, there is one issue where Marines are not routinely assigned to guard consulates. In Benghazi, it was a consulate rather than a full-fledged embassy. But still, I think he did strike a blow on a vulnerability that's been all over the news this week.
What about the point that Biden made, saying that if Ryan had voted to cut funding for embassy security? I mean, was that a fair
I think our fact checkers noted that there's some extrapolation involved, that Ryan didn't make a direct vote for cutting security, but if you look at some of the cuts he suggested, security might have to be cut. So I think that, Biden mounted a pretty forceful defense. He moved the conversation very quickly to the obvious strengths of the Obama administration, such as killing Osama bin Laden, so that he pivoted very quickly away from security in Libya toward a laundry list of administration accomplishments.
Yeah, he went right into the Osama.
Right.
And that how deft was that?
I thought it was pretty quick pivot, yes.
Right. Now, I remember 4 years ago when Biden was elected, part of the reasoning you heard from Obama campaign people was that Biden has that foreign policy experience to bolster Obama's lack of any kind of international experience. And you kind of saw that tonight a little bit with Ryan not having any real foreign policy experience. His expertise is more in the budget. How did he hold up, do you think?
I think that it was obvious that Vice President Biden is incredibly fluent in foreign affairs. He has years and years of experience. He was able to speak very authoritatively and very smoothly on the topics, whereas I think for Congressman Ryan, while he was very well prepped and you could see that he had studied hard, he didn't have the same assurance, and I think he resorted a little bit more to standard attack lines, like he must have said many, many times that the Obama foreign policy is unraveling. Rather than details, he made a lot of somewhat broad accusations. But I don't think he was trounced in any way. I think he was able to effectively put forward some of the Romney positions. I think that was more effective in Libya, perhaps somewhat less effective on Afghanistan, where I think Biden scored a few points.
But did you see any real major differences between the two on overall on foreign policy and the way we did on domestic issues?
No, the differences are much sharper on domestic policy. On foreign policy, I think that you saw many times in which Ryan said, well, we agree with that, but we do more of this, we do less of that. I think he tried very hard to differentiate himself from the Obama administration on Iran and the sanctions. I'm not sure how effective that was.
And the sanctions have been fairly tough from this administration, haven't
they been? Yes.
The
point that Congressman Ryan was trying to make is that the Republicans in Congress were pressing for sanctions earlier, and the Obama administration was trying to hold them off. What Vice President Biden said in response was that the Obama administration wanted to wait until they'd gotten most of the rest of the world on board, in which case the sanctions could be more effectively enforced. So that was the give and take.
Is there anything new on these issues that you heard tonight, or is it more the same old rhetoric?
I didn't learn anything new.
Okay. Susan, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Megan?
I'm joined once again by White House correspondent Jackie Combs and Metro editor Carolyn Ryan. Let's talk a little bit about the role of emotion in this debate. It was pretty hot, particularly on the Biden side. Carolyn, you had some interesting observations about that.
This was very striking to me because, I was somewhat critical of Biden because he felt to me almost manic and kind of, excessive in his emotion. But it did feel like on a couple of answers, he was able to emote more naturally and kind of reveal himself personally in a way that Ryan, I don't think, accomplished. I was struck by the abortion answer because, again, it felt like something that Biden had thought a lot about, that he understood was a deep and serious subject. He was not smiling or waving his arms. And he was able to convey kind of how his faith played a role, but how he thought about women and their rights. Right. And it felt like the Ryan, to me, felt more mechanical in general throughout the night. I mean, he was good, he was prepared, he certainly held his own in a way that he did not seem callow or inexperienced. But I do think emotion, in terms of understanding who these people are and kind of getting
the humanity question, which has been a question throughout this campaign with a number of the candidates.
That's
here,
exactly right. Yes.
Not with Joe Biden, but kind of with everyone else.
I agree that Paul Ryan really, held his own here. That there wasn't a big gap that you felt in terms of their familiarity with the issues. I have problems with a number of the facts that.
Yes, I know. In addition to what our fact check desk is doing, Jackie, right. you had your endless list of howlers that you noticed
right. Well,
as was going on.
I mentioned one, but this question of whether Governor Romney, if president, would increase defense spending, Paul Ryan denied. He said we're just going to keep
we just don't want
defense
to have
where
it is.
Well, on one level, you could say that's true, but what they have proposed is to keep defense military spending at 4% of the size of the economy, of gross domestic product, for the next 10 years, which would require a $2.3 trillion increase for the Pentagon over what's projected. That's mainly because it falls below 4%. 4% of GDP is where it is now, but it falls below as a share of the economy by the end of the decade because our spending for things like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security is going up as older people, as the baby boomers retire. So it indeed does require, as Vice President Biden said, not just a $2 trillion increase, a $2.3 trillion increase.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because it seemed like Paul Ryan had much more sort of the numbers at his command, even if you're not so happy with how he played with some of them. And Biden seemed more focused on sort of the larger narrative. Like, I'm going to get the point across, even if I'm a little sloppy in the numbers. Right. It seemed like, he kept talking about not having tax cuts for people making more than $1 million, even though the official policy of the administration is $250,000. So there was some of the kind of loosey-goosey on the numbers.
It's almost, to me, like Joe Biden was the id of the Democratic Party. And the id of the Democratic Party was outraged by Mitt Romney, is outraged by Paul Ryan, and he just can't help but express that.
And there was sort of the pent-up sort of frustration from last week and the not seizing on the very many opportunities that existed
I think the
there.
Democratic base is going to be very happy with Joe Biden's performance. But then I was, I think, wrong last week in saying I thought conservatives might be troubled by Mitt Romney's moderate tone in the debate. They were just happy to see him win.
Someone winning, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
I was struck by some of the one moment on the foreign policy, we were talking about sort of foreign policy being a sort of a strong suit for Paul Ryan and sort of defensive for Joe Biden. The one time that seemed not so true was on Afghanistan to me, which was, it seemed like the one time that Paul Ryan seemed a little fumbly in terms of trying to figure out what their position on the 2014 withdrawal was.
It also felt like the more he was pressed, the more nervous he got.
And the more unsure that answer seemed.
I mean,
like
that felt like the weakest moment, I think, of the debate for him. And it's a difficult position to articulate. I don't think Romney has done so either. But to insist that there are differences and not be able to enumerate them, I think Martha Raddatz, her kind of depth came through in that exchange. Yeah. And by the way, we should note, I know we're getting a lot of tweets, Martha for president, she was excellent. She was really excellent. You know, her command, her ability to keep a conversation going, but keep it interesting. I mean, it was really good television.
Yeah, she knows this stuff, and it showed.
And it was clear that she spent the
right.
first 25 minutes on policy.
Exactly. And the thing about Afghanistan, I might add, is it's a really tough area for Paul Ryan to wade into for two reasons. One, the American public wants out. And two, a lot of people in the Republican Party want out. There's a very sort of isolationist strain, and just even those who aren't isolationists think we've been there long enough, it's time to turn it over to the Afghanis.
Thanks a lot. For a look at how social media is responding to tonight's debate, let's check in with Jim Roberts. He's standing by with Andrew Fitzgerald, the manager of editorial programming at Twitter. Jim?
Thanks, Megan. Andrew, another big night for Twitter, I think, right?
Absolutely. Definitely a big night on Twitter. About 3 million total tweets sent about the vice presidential debate tonight.
So compare that to last week, okay.
So last week was around 10 million. So a little bit of a lower volume for the vice presidential debate, but still quite a lot of conversation.
Right, and for me, it was quite a lot of intense conversation. I mean, the range of subjects tonight, I felt out of breath at many, many occasions, including just a few minutes ago. It was over, and a lot of stuff went on from Libya at the beginning to abortion at the end. Any highlights that you can point to?
Definitely. So I think two of the our biggest peaks for the night in terms of tweets sent in a given minute.
Okay.
The first one was Joe Biden's line, "Now you're Jack Kennedy," which generated roughly 58,000 tweets per minute.
A throwback to Lloyd Benson.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second was actually from Congressman Paul Ryan about the Obama administration with their hand in the cookie jar on Medicare. Exactly. And that generated roughly 55,000 tweets per minute.
Okay. Are there comparable figures you can point to from last week? Is that high, low?
Definitely high. Not quite as high as the numbers we were seeing last week. But,
what about malarkey? That seemed to
be a
big moment. Yeah.
Malarkey was definitely, it's one of the early peaks of the night, over 31,000 tweets per minute. And it's interesting. So the phrase malarkey itself has received over 39,000 mentions on Twitter tonight. It's been a big night for malarkey.
Yeah. Okay. Followed by.
And so funny thing, the Obama for America campaign actually through the Joe Biden Twitter account using Twitter's promoted products began bidding on promoted tweets around the phrases malarkey and bunch of stuff.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, some of the things that I noticed, fair amount of conversation about the way Joe Biden, through much of it, was laughing. He wasn't sighing like Al Gore did a number of years ago, but boy, he was very, very animated at times. And I know that there was a lot of pictures floating around too, right? People were circulating pictures of him throwing his arms up.
Yeah, I think that might have been the most retweeted picture of Joe Biden. We haven't checked the numbers yet, but the picture from Reuters that was tweeted by Andrew at BuzzFeed of Biden with his hands high in the air.
I noticed Amanda Mickle at ProPublica had tweeted at one point, I think they put together a collection of just Biden's facial expressions through the course of the night, and pulled a tweet from Joshua Lyman. Biden just laughed in Ryan's face. Amazing. I saw a lot of things like that. Some of the other things that I saw, I don't know how they reflected in your mind. My friend, we heard that so many times from Joe Biden, right? He kept referring to Paul Ryan as my friend. A number of people that I was following seemed to think that was a sign of some derision or condescension.
Yeah, definitely. I think people were paying a lot of attention to the words that the vice president was using, and particularly because he gave us such wonderful words to enjoy as malarkey and turns of phrase like bunch of stuff. But I think people were kind of keeping an eye on the vice president to see if he would make one of his famous gaffes.
And he kind of didn't, right? I mean, or at least nobody seemed to be pointing to anything like that. The other thing that I noticed was a fair amount of conversation about the moderator herself. quite a bit of complimentary conversation.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. People seem to love the moderator this time. In fact, Eva Longoria tweeted that Martha Raddatz is the best moderator ever.
Okay. The one last thing I want to leave you with is, I know that you guys use, or try to use sentiment analysis to try to get a sense of, whether one candidate came out ahead or not. I also know that it takes a while to compile those statistics. What were you seeing anything that would indicate that one side felt better about the debate than the other?
I think on our hashtag debates page, where we're sort of collecting opinions from pundits, both on the left and the right, towards the end of the debate, I was sort of seeing that pundits on the left were saying that Joe Biden very clearly won the debate, and more pundits on the right were saying that the debate was a draw.
Oh, that's interesting. Nobody was saying Ryan won, or at least you weren't hearing that much?
Didn't really see a lot of that.
Okay.
But yeah, so we'll certainly see later this evening when we compile the numbers for the Twitter Political Index. Be very interesting to see if the numbers shift at all.
Okay, hope to see that soon then. Andrew Fitzgerald from Twitter, thanks for coming on. Hope to see you again next time. Take care. Back to you, Megan.
Let's head back to the fact check desk one more time, where Rick Burke is with Annie Lowrey. Rick?
Let's go right to a clip of Brian talking about the sorry state of the economy.
Did they come in and inherit a tough situation? Absolutely. But we're going in the wrong direction. Look at where we are. The economy is barely limping along. It's growing at 1.3%. That's slower than it grew last year, and last year was slower than the year before.
Annie, 1.3%, that is a really sad number. Is that accurate?
It's a sad number, and it is accurate. That's the government data for second quarter growth. But delving into it, it's an interesting question to try and assess how much of this is due to Obama administration policy, how much of this is due to other factors in the economy outside of the administration's control. And the answer is probably more the latter than the former. We're recovering from a very, very bad recession in which there was a financial crisis on top of a recession, which tends to lengthen the time that it takes to recover and just mean that the economy is growing very slowly. And then you also have some other factors in that second quarter. So the drought really hit farms, and the United States is a big agricultural producer. And so that actually shaved a significant amount off of GDP growth. You've seen a big slowdown in emerging markets. You've had the European debt crisis on top of that. It's just a lot of things that the Obama administration can't do to juice these growth numbers. So the economy is just kind of excruciatingly slowly growing, adding jobs, but it's been very sluggish. And a lot of private and public forecasters think it's going to be sluggish for the foreseeable future.
But wasn't Brian citing promises or estimates, projections by Obama folks earlier on who thought it would be much better by now and throwing it back at them?
Yeah, so he's citing a January 2009 report by two former administration economists, Christina Romer and Jared Bernstein. At the time, they didn't realize how bad the recession was. So they were trying to analyze how a stimulus might have an effect on jobs, and they projected that unemployment would never rise above 8%. What they didn't realize was that the bottom had been totally pulled out of the economy, and their projections were very optimistic. And both Jared Bernstein and Christina Romer then pushed for the government to do a lot more once they understood it. So Republicans have argued that the administration has promised that unemployment wouldn't go above 8%. Obviously, we just dipped back under 8% and just barely recently. But that's not really fair. And, Barack Obama has sort of stopped making big proclamations about the number of jobs that they'll create. He said that he wants to create more manufacturing jobs and juice exports, whereas Romney has continued to make kind of bold claims about what the White House can do for growth and what it'll do for jobs. So he's promised to create 12 million jobs in his first term, and he's also said that his tax reform plan will lead to an outburst of growth.
And it's also the age-old question of when does an administration own the economy? And is it how many years into the term, really?
Exactly. So whoever is president next will inherit a much better economy than the one that was just inherited. And I think it's been very interesting because it wasn't totally clear how the current economy was going to weigh on voters' minds, whether it was going to advantage Mr. Romney or Mr. Obama. And it seems like because you've had some growth, that's led into the incumbency advantage. But growth has been very sluggish. And Mr. Romney has really tried to capitalize on that, as Congressman Ryan did tonight.
Did you think it was effective when Congressman Ryan was mentioning the unemployment in his hometown and also comparing it to Scranton, where Biden is from.
Yeah, it's been hard for the Romney-Ryan ticket to kind of argue that they would be better for the Rust Belt. Obviously, Governor Romney kind of came out and said that he thought that the auto companies should have been allowed to fail. Congressman Ryan did take a vote for TARP. He voted for TARP. And actually requested TARP money on behalf of his district, but he's also criticized it as being, a honeypot and being, and he did that again tonight. And so I think that his position on that has been a little bit unclear, and it's left him open to some criticism.
And finally, before we go, wasn't it interesting that Biden was invoking Ronald Reagan more than Ryan was?
It's true. Ronald Reagan has become a favorite president to cite of Democrats because he, I think that the Republican Party has moved somewhat to the right, and so Reagan looks a little bit more moderate. He raised taxes, for instance, and so they've been invoking him quite a bit, which is interesting.
Annie, thank you so much. Now let's go back to Megan for some final thoughts.
Before we go, I'm back with some closing thoughts from Caroline Ryan and Jackie Calmes. So how do we think both campaigns feel about tonight?
I think probably both, unlike last week where it was one-sided. I think they both feel good. Since last week, an enthusiasm gap had opened up with a lot of Democrats.
Had really showed up in the polling.
Right, and I'd gotten an email from a Democratic operative who thought Biden did a great job. Maybe he was strong, but I know the base needed that. After last week, it was reasonable to think that if Obama couldn't show up for the debate, why should we show up for the election? And so there you have it. And I thought, Paul Ryan was an energetic and well-spoken advocate for the views of his party.
I think both sides felt like they opened up vulnerabilities that they're going to continue to pursue and to try to prosecute. So I think the Romney-Ryan ticket is going to push again on this question of foreign policy and what happened in Benghazi and what does it say more generally about the Obama foreign policy and approach to the world. And I think that Biden, as Jackie explained, really felt like he took apart the Romney-Ryan approach to economic policy, the 47%, what that means for the middle class, and that's where they feel like they have a sweet spot. Now, again, we're going to have a debate next week, very different format, very diffuse.
It's a town hall.
Much more human.
5 days. We only have 5 days, not even a full week.
Right.
I'm interested in how you guys think that format is going to play. I mean, and how tonight and last week sort of set the table for that debate. It is a town hall. That's maybe a format possibly that it plays better to the president's strengths. He's done more town halls than he's done debates in the last 4 years, and maybe a little more awkward for Governor Romney, who's not necessarily as comfortable on the rope line kind of thing,
But all these notions and predictions, I think, have been turned upside down. So I don't know. Maybe Romney will surprise us. I do know that unlike tonight, where Biden was able to really aggressively go at Ryan, this is not a format that will allow that kind of one-on-one attack. And I think for the Democrats who are lusting for some kind of revenge after that terrible performance, Obama can't do it in such a setting. I mean, he's really got to talk to the questioners, to the people asking the questions, and sort of have much more of a conversation. So he can't kind of deliver, if they're waiting for some kind of knockout, that's not where it's going to come.
Yeah. And it might be just me, but I think the town hall format can make both sides look stilted and scripted, where they'll take the question, and the questions could come from out of nowhere. There's no predicting what a town hall audience will ask. But then if they'll take it and they'll run with it and get across their talking points. But that's a format that puts a premium on being empathetic, being natural, and it just for President Obama's part, it depends on which President Obama shows up. I think
I do think if you looked at our polls, the one area where he seems to be holding on, Romney gains in all these other areas, is empathy. So if he continues that, and if he's able to connect with people, that might really kind of reinforce what people have liked about him.
Thank you both. That's all for tonight. Stay with us online for more on Campaign 2012. I'm Megan Lieberman. Thanks for watching.